It was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, a fairy tale proposal in the freezing winter snow. He fell to one knee, looking at me with what I believed was true devotion, yet a chilling undercurrent whispered that something was terribly wrong. He presented a ring that sparkled with blinding brilliance, a gem of flawless perfection meant to bind us forever. But as the lid opened, I didn't feel warmth, only a crushing weight wrapping around my finger, sealing a fate I could not yet comprehend. His smile wasn't that of a loving husband, but of a collector who had finally tracked down his most prized possession. His words cut through the winter air like a blade, asking if I would become his ultimate, beautiful masterpiece. Blinded by my own desperation for love, I spoke his name with a trembling voice, letting my defenses crumble entirely. I wanted so desperately to believe this was real, oblivious to the trap snapping shut around me. I poured my entire heart out to him, swearing that even if I were reborn 1,000 times, my soul would still choose him. It was a vow made in absolute innocence, a promise that he would soon use to destroy everything I was. But the moment the ring slipped onto my finger, the illusion shattered, and I became nothing more than a silent ornament in his grand collection. He turned his back on me with a cold, triumphant smirk, leaving me trapped inside a golden cage. Day after day, his hands clasped heavy, suffocating jewelry around my neck, tightening like a gilded noose. Every gift was a new chain, dressing me up to play a part in a life that was no longer mine to live. He would loom over me, praising my beauty not as a living, breathing woman, but as a perfect, lifeless doll that belonged solely to him. His touch made my skin crawl, but I was forced to stand frozen, locked in his agonizing embrace. The cycle was endless, with servants presenting endless trinkets to adorn my hollow frame, each piece chosen to perfect his quiet trophy. I was suffocating under the weight of his obsession, desperately searching for any way to reclaim my voice. I finally gathered the courage to ask for a sliver of freedom, pleading to attend a simple social gathering to escape my confinement. But the moment the word left my lips, the air in the room turned to absolute ice. I begged him to let me see my friends, reminding him that I had been completely cut off from the world since the day we wed. My heart hammered against my ribs, desperate for just a single moment of human connection. His response was a cold, venomous refusal that stripped away any lingering hope I possessed. His eyes burned with a dark, controlling fury, reminding me that my entire existence was subject to his absolute authority. I tried to fight back, pointing out the bitter truth that even when he did let me out, I was kept silent and forbidden from uttering a single word to anyone. The realization of my total isolation was choking me, forcing me to speak out. With a single sharp command, he silenced me, treating my pleas as nothing more than a minor annoyance to be dismissed. He demanded the next ornament, completely ignoring the tears welling in my eyes as my spirit began to break. The grand estate I once admired had transformed into a literal fortress of isolation, locked tight from the outside world. I was a prisoner, kept hidden from everyone, designed to wither away in absolute solitude. Seasons bled into one another outside my window, a mocking display of life moving forward while I remained frozen in time. I sat in silence, a ghost waiting for a savior who was never going to come. Then, the royal physician delivered a diagnosis that sent a jolt of pure lightning through my veins. A new life was growing inside me, a fragile soul now bound to this mansion of horrors. In that exact second, a terrifying realization washed over me, striking me harder than any physical blow. If I stayed, this innocent child would inherit my living nightmare. I saw the future with brutal clarity, my precious child kept in a display case, treated as nothing more than another hollow toy for his twisted collection. I knew right then that I would rather die than let him possess our baby. Under the cover of a pitch-black night, I fled into the dense forest, clutching a single bag and running until my lungs burned. I was leaving behind wealth and status, desperately racing toward a dangerous, uncertain freedom. I discarded my noble title and took up the grueling life of a common maid, working with my own hands to survive. It was exhausting, back-breaking labor, but for the first time in years, I was the master of my own destiny. My once delicate hands grew rough and calloused, and the radiant beauty my husband had prized began to fade under the harsh realities of toil. But as my outer shell weathered, my spirit only grew stronger. Even with dirt staining my face and my body aching from relentless work, a genuine smile returned to my lips. I was free, my child was safe, and I believed the nightmare was finally behind me. But peace is a fragile thing, easily shattered when you are hunted by a monster who never forgets a missing piece of his collection. The shadows of my past were quietly closing in on my sanctuary. I awoke in the dead of night to a freezing touch on my cheek, a familiar leather glove that sent a wave of absolute terror through my body. The nightmare had found me in the dark. I sat up in terror, my heart violently hammering against my ribs as his dark silhouette loomed over my bed. There was no escape, no hiding from the man who claimed to own my very soul. He sneered down at me, mocking my desperate attempt at freedom and laughing at my foolish belief that I could ever truly hide from him. Every word was a cruel reminder of my utter helplessness. Then his voice dropped to a sickening whisper, declaring that our ultimate masterpiece had finally been born. A cold dread gripped my chest, and my gaze instinctively darted across the room. My eyes landed on the crib, only to find it completely empty, the small blanket tossed aside in the cold air. My baby was gone. I lunged out of bed, grabbing his coat in a frenzy of panic, screaming and demanding to know where he had taken my child. The fragile piece I had fought so hard for was torn away in an instant. He brushed me off with sickening ease, smiling as he claimed he would never harm his own bloodline. But his reassuring words carried a dark truth. He had already decided the child's fate. He squeezed his gloved hand around my jaw, inspecting my worn face with disgust, muttering that his prized doll had withered before her time. My value to him was gone, but my child's had just begun. Slamming me aside, he turned to walk away, prompting me to scramble to my feet and sprint down the dimly lit hallway. I had to find my baby before it was too late. My bare feet pounded against the cold wooden floorboards as I screamed her name into the empty house, my voice cracking with absolute desperation. I was running out of time. At the bottom of the stairs, a figure stepped out of the shadows, cradling my sleeping baby in her arms. It was Alicia, the one person I thought I could trust with my life. My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at her, my mind refusing to accept the horrifying reality unfolding right in front of me. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. I demanded to know why she was holding my child, my voice trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and rising fury. The realization that I had been sold out by a friend shattered what was left of my sanity. She wept, pleading that she had no choice, but I had no mercy left to give. I ordered her to hand my daughter over immediately, my motherly instincts flaring into a desperate defensive rage. But before I could take a step forward, a brutal grip yanked me backward by my hair, tearing a scream of pure agony from my throat. Zeppelin had caught me. He threw me violently to the floor, declaring to the household that I had completely lost my mind. I lay there bruised, watching my child being carried away into the dark. He looked down at me with cold, aristocratic indifference, smugly announcing that my replacement had already been found and that my existence was no longer of any consequence. I scrambled up and lunged at him again, begging for my child, but he ruthlessly shoved me back, ordering me to stay out of his sight. I was losing everything. Driven by pure maternal instinct, I threw myself forward and bit down on his hand with all the force I could muster, tasting copper as my teeth sank deep into his flesh. He let out a sharp cry of pain, reeling back and clutching his bleeding hand as my feral attack caught him completely off guard. His shock instantly twisted into a murderous rage, horrified that a mere doll had dared to defile his perfect, sacred body. He hissed that he had intended to let me live out of pity, but my defiance had finally sealed my doom. There was no mercy left in his cold blue eyes. He slammed the heavy wooden door shut, the lock clicking into place with a definitive, bone-chilling thud that trapped me inside the dark room. I threw myself against the barricaded door, pounding my fists until they bled, screaming his name to the empty corridor, but only silence answered. Through the gap beneath the door, a thick, suffocating smoke began to pour in, carrying his final, chilling words that I was finally being discarded. Within seconds, an explosion of roaring orange flames tore through the room, leaving me trapped in a burning inferno with only one final desperate thought. I had to survive to get my daughter back. As the toxic smoke filled my lungs, my legs gave out under me, sending me collapsing to the hard wooden floor. The roaring flames closed in, a terrifying realization taking hold. Even in my final moments, I was failing to break free from Zeppelin's suffocating grasp. Lying on the burning planks, the heat searing my skin, a desperate cry echoed in my fading mind. If only I could go back. If only I could return to the beginning. I swore I would change everything and destroy the man who ruined me. The world went black, but instead of the cold embrace of death, my eyes suddenly blinked open to a soft, flickering light. Through a heavy, disorienting haze, a blurry figure loomed over me, whispering words I couldn't yet understand. My vision cleared with a violent jolt, revealing a face I never expected to see again. She looked down at me with genuine worry, asking if I was all right, leaving me completely paralyzed by her voice. She gently placed a hand on my shoulder, noting with a soft smile that my heart seemed unusually heavy on this of all days. Her touch felt entirely real, sending a shockwave of confusion straight to my core. I stared back in absolute disbelief, my mind screaming her name in terror and wonder. Why was Alice standing right in front of me? The memory of her lifeless body pooled in blood rushed back, a brutal reminder that Zeppelin had supposedly murdered her long ago. If she was alive, then where on earth was I? I wondered if I had somehow crossed into heaven, but her gentle voice quickly pulled me back, telling me that if I could just endure this painful day, everything would be fine. Before I could ask a single question, she turned and pushed open the massive double doors, inviting me to step out into a blinding golden light. As the light faded, my eyes adjusted to a breathtaking sight, a magnificent courtyard adorned with cascading white flowers and a pristine, sparkling fountain. I slowly stepped forward, my breath catching in my throat as I recognized the grand estate prepared for a lavish celebration. I looked down at my own dress, my hands trembling as the impossible reality began to crash over me like a tidal wave. Suddenly, a familiar, hated silhouette stepped into the courtyard, wearing an immaculate white suit and a pristine, deceptive smile. Standing beside him was a beautiful young woman with long, silver-purple hair, holding a vibrant bouquet of blue roses that shimmered under the sun. The entire courtyard was filled with noble guests, all gathered to witness what appeared to be a damnably beautiful and romantic wedding. But as I sat silently among the crowd in my elegant gown, a cold, bitter realization froze the blood in my veins. This glorious, sickening celebration was my own husband's second wedding, and I was forced to watch him bind himself to another woman. Under the solemn blessing of the goddess, the priest declared them husband and wife, and the audience erupted into a synchronized, deafening round of applause. Zeppelin waved to the cheering crowd with his usual aristocratic arrogance, basking in the adoration of a high society that knew nothing of his monstrous nature. I sat frozen, mechanically clapping my hands as a dark, dangerous fury began to ignite deep inside my soul. Then Zeppelin slowly turned his head, his cold blue eyes locking onto mine with a silent, menacing command to smile, immediately sending me back into the terrors of my past. The sickening smirk on his lips made it all feel entirely too real. The heavy jewelry, the golden cage, and the endless days of being his quiet, obedient doll. But instead of shrinking back in fear, I forced a brilliant, flawless smile onto my face, resolving to play along until I could tear his perfect world apart. My mind drifted back to the very beginning, to the quiet path where I had first found Alicia collapsed and half dead in the grass. I couldn't just pass her by, so I brought her into my home, personally tending to her illness day and night until she finally stabilized. The moment she opened her bright purple eyes, her radiant, innocent smile was so lovely that anyone would have lost their heart to her. And I was no exception, instantly drawn to her warmth and desperately hoping she would become the friend I so sorely needed. Isolated and profoundly lonely after Zeppelin cut me off from all my childhood friends, Alicia's gentle presence quickly became my only sanctuary. For a brief, beautiful moment, I truly believed that my loneliness was over and that I had finally found a sister to share my burdens with. But that sweet, fragile peace was destined to be shattered in less than a single year. During a quiet dinner we had arranged to celebrate her birthday, a sudden, violent spasm of pain struck her, causing her fork to clatter loudly against her plate. She clasped her hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as she whimpered that she couldn't eat, confirming my worst, most silent fears. The devastating truth shattered my heart into a million pieces. The woman I had saved, trusted, and cherished was carrying my husband's child. I confronted Zeppelin in a storm of grief and fury, demanding to know how he could betray me with the one person I loved. He only laughed, a cruel, mocking sound as he turned from his mirror, calling me naive for thinking a beautiful man and woman could live under the same roof without a spark. He stepped toward me with terrifying calm, casually declaring that neither he nor Alicia were to blame for what had happened. He leaned in close, his voice dripping with venom as he whispered that the fault lay entirely with me for leaving such a beautiful woman in his reach. My hands clenched into tight fists, my fingernails cutting into my palms as I forced myself to ask what he intended to do with her. He stroked his chin thoughtfully, asking if this hadn't actually turned out for the absolute best. He reminded me coldly of the bitter truth. We had been married for over 10 years, and I had failed to provide him with a single heir. Back then, his venomous words had worked, making me believe that my inability to have a child was a sin that justified his betrayal. But sitting here in the past, watching him dance with his new bride, I finally understood the depth of his calculated malice. I watched them twirl across the ballroom, their perfect steps masking the monstrous rot hidden beneath their beautiful faces. The memories shifted to a dark, rainy night inside a bouncing carriage, the sound of my own desperate screams echoing through the storm. Tears spilled down my cheeks as the carriage rattled forward, the horrifying realization settling deep in my chest. I had truly been sent back in time to the very day of his second wedding. But this second chance wasn't just for me. It was for my precious, unborn child, Psyche. I remembered the warmth of carrying her, sitting in the quiet safety of my room, dreaming of a life where we could finally be happy together. I could still feel her soft, chubby cheeks and those tiny, wiggling hands that had brought genuine joy to my otherwise hollow existence. But then the vision of our final, tragic moments flashed before my eyes, my baby being carried away down the dark stairs by the woman I had once called a friend. No, this wasn't a curse. Returning to this moment was the ultimate blessing. I looked out the window with absolute resolve, knowing that this time my daughter would never have to suffer a single second of the nightmare I survived. Clutching my dress, I tried to anchor myself to reality. I still didn't know the reason I was sent back to the past, but the texture of the fabric in my hands was undeniably real. Looking out at the sunlit estate, one thing became absolutely certain. My second chance was paid for in blood, and I would not waste a single drop of it. Zeppelin, Devonshire, now it is your turn to be completely ruined. This time, I will ensure a different outcome, even if I have to tear down everything we once built. Under the cover of the dark, quiet night, a powerful figure stood in the shadows of the forest, watching the road with sharp, calculating eyes. A grand carriage rattled down the dirt path, its driver bowing deeply as they crossed into the restricted imperial territory. As the carriage rushed past, the mysterious observer caught a fleeting glimpse of a blonde woman sitting silently inside, her profile etched with deep sorrow. A spark of recognition flared in his chest, his voice barely a whisper as he breathed out my name in disbelief. Before he could pursue the carriage, a soft meow cut through the quiet night air, drawing his attention to a small shadow slipping through the bushes. Emerging from the foliage was a small, sleek black cat named Leo, its bright green eyes glowing with an intelligent, almost human light. Leo leapt effortlessly onto the young man's shoulder, telepathically teasing him, asking if he had suddenly taken an interest in the fragile woman who just rode by. He brushed the comment aside, his gaze lingering on the distant road as he muttered that she usually looked like a hollow corpse, completely devoid of any emotion. But in that split second, Her tear-stained face in the carriage window had shattered his perception of her, revealing a vulnerability he had never seen before. Leo purred mockingly, pointing out that her look wasn't just sad but intensely defiant, a comment that visibly startled the young nobleman. Feeling exposed, he pointed an accusing finger at the cat, warning Leo to stop reading his mind and trespassing into his private thoughts. But his annoyance quickly turned to suspicion. The possessive Count Devonshire would never let his wife travel alone, yet she was heading back entirely unescorted. Turning to his loyal subordinate, he called out to Croa, his tone instantly shifting into that of a commanding monarch. He demanded to know what Count Devonshire was doing inside his imperial domain, catching his knight off guard with the sharp question. Croa explained hesitantly that during His Majesty's absence at war, Count Devonshire had taken a second wife, celebrating the wedding that very day on the Valeria coast. The Emperor's eyes flared with pure, dangerous rage upon realizing that Zeppelin had dared to hold a sickening celebration for a concubine inside his most sacred territory. He ordered Croa to throw the invaders out immediately, giving them a strict deadline of tomorrow to clear out of his domain forever. As the Emperor stormed off, Leo groomed himself nonchalantly, knowing that a massive storm was about to crash down on the Devonshire family. Meanwhile, the carriage finally arrived at the imposing, cold estate that had once been my beautiful prison, Devonshire Manor. Stepping onto the pristine gravel, a shiver ran down my spine as I realized I had truly returned to the lion's den. I looked up at the towering spires, desperately trying to recall what my life had been like during this exact point in time. The bitter truth rushed back. Despite being the Countess, Zeppelin had stripped me of all authority, keeping me locked away like a decorative flower, while he controlled everything. But as I walked the manicured paths, a sudden realization halted my steps, my eyes locking onto a familiar structure. Looming before me was the magnificent glass dome of the Hall of Light, glowing brilliantly under the afternoon sun. This beautiful greenhouse was more than just a garden. It was Zeppelin's absolute most cherished, sacred sanctuary. The Devonshire family's obsessive adoration for the arts was legendary, and this climate-controlled vault housed their most priceless, delicate treasures. A dark, thrilling thought bloomed in my mind. What if I took everything he loved and burned this beautiful palace of glass to the ground? I imagined the utter horror and despair on Zeppelin's face, a satisfying warmth spreading through my chest before reality cruelly pulled me back. With heavily armed guards stationed at the entrance day and night, any hope of destroying his precious collection was utterly impossible for now. Compounding my helplessness was my family's bankruptcy. My parents had been forced to rely entirely on Zeppelin's pocketbook just to survive, leaving me completely powerless. If only I had possessed an ounce of leverage back then, I could have stopped Alicia from ever stepping foot into this manor as his second wife. As my thoughts spiraled, a shadow fell over me as a protective silk parasol was gently raised to block out the harsh light. I turned to see my faithful maid, Alice, looking at me with genuine concern, urging me to protect myself from the blazing sun. A wave of profound emotion washed over me, a fragile smile gracing my lips as I thanked the one person who had truly cared for me. We walked side by side through the vibrant garden, her gentle presence instantly soothing the raging fire in my soul. In my past life, when Alicia was giving birth to her second child, Alice had smuggled me out of this suffocating house to a village festival just to make me smile. But our fleeting moment of happiness had been brutally cut short when Zeppelin caught us, his face twisted in a monstrous, sadistic rage as he raised his heavy whip. He had ruthlessly beaten Alice to death right in front of my eyes, leaving me with a crushing, suffocating debt of guilt that I could never repay. Looking at her alive and breathing beside me, I stopped walking and asked her if she had any secret wishes she desperately wanted to fulfill. She blinked in surprise before letting out a bright, innocent laugh, declaring that her only wish was to spend peaceful, happy days by my side. I pressed her, offering her priceless jewels or a massive pay raise, wanting desperately to give her the world before tragedy could strike again. Alice let the parasol slip from her hands, stepping forward to clasp my trembling hands in her warm, steady grip. With fierce, unwavering loyalty shining in her eyes, she whispered that she needed no treasures, only my safety and company. Tears welled in my eyes as I squeezed her hands back, swearing to myself that this time I would protect Alice no matter the cost. Together, we picked up the parasol and headed back toward the mansion, a newfound determination burning brightly within me. We stepped into the grand, echoing corridors of the manor, my steady footsteps echoing against the cold stone walls. But as we reached the grand staircase, my feet froze at the base of the third floor, the dark, forbidden territory where Zeppelin's private chambers lay waiting. Zeppelin had always positioned himself at the absolute peak of the manor, looking down on everyone else to maintain his cruel illusion of absolute supremacy. The grand staircase led directly to his private sanctuary on the third floor, a forbidden territory where no one was permitted to set foot, including me. That heavy, gilded door to his study remained locked tight day and night, harboring secrets he desperately kept hidden from the world. If I could somehow breach those walls, I would find the keys to his undoing, the hidden truth behind the fall of the Devonshire house. I stood there, eyes burning with determination, knowing that within that very study lay the single weakness I needed to destroy him. Steeling my resolve, I took a decisive step forward, ready to risk everything to cross the forbidden boundary. But before I could reach the landing, the sharp voice of the guard, Hans, cut through the quiet, blocking my path and reminding me of the strict limits. As I reluctantly turned back, Alice watched me from a distance, her sharp eyes picking up on my desperate state of mind. Retreating to the safety of my bedchamber, my mind raced with frantic thoughts until Alice quietly stepped inside, breaking the heavy silence. She looked straight at me and asked if I wanted to infiltrate the study, catching me completely off guard with her sharp intuition. It mirrored the warmth of my past life, when she had held my hands, always willing to break the rules just to bring a sliver of joy into my prison. Fear gripped my chest as I warned her of the severe consequences she would face if Zeppelin ever discovered her involvement. Alice merely smiled, reassuring me that with the Count away on his honeymoon for a week, security was at its absolute weakest. She quickly laid out a daring plan to lure Hans into the kitchen, creating the perfect window of opportunity for me to slip inside. Giving me a playful wink, she told me to leave everything to her, fully believing she was simply helping a lonely wife find a book to read. Deeply touched by her unconditional devotion, I whispered her name, knowing this was the moment our dangerous gamble would begin. Under the cover of night, the heavy door groaned softly as it opened, admitting me into the dark, forbidden depths. Holding a single candle to guide my way, I stepped over the threshold into the pitch-black study, my heart hammering against my ribs. Looking around the massive blue-lit room, I realized that in my entire past life, I had never once been permitted to cross this threshold. Time was running out, and I had to move quickly to uncover the devastating leverage that would bring Zeppelin to his knees. My trembling hands reached for the polished wooden drawers, sliding them open in a frantic search for any hidden records. Inside, a neat stack of secret documents sat waiting, practically radiating the malice of the man who had locked them away. I pulled the papers out and began scanning the elegant script, my eyes widening as I recognized the names of familiar noble families. But then a cold dread seized my throat as a single prominent title on the pages made my breath hitch in pure horror. Staring back at me in bold letters was the name of my own family, the Obelia house, documenting a nightmare I had never known. The cold, precise log detailed the systematic acquisition of our lands, the forced closure of our businesses, and the sudden pile of debts. It was a calculated, financial assassination. My family had not simply fallen on hard times, they had been meticulously destroyed from the inside out. My chest tightened as I found signed statements from my former friends, promising never to contact me again under the weight of his blackmail. The memory of Zeppelin drinking his tea while casually complaining about my father begging for money flashed in my mind with sickening clarity. I remembered his mocking, possessive touch as he told me my friends had grown tired of me, isolating me so that I had no one left but him. The horrific realization crashed down upon me. Every sweet, comforting word he had ever spoken to me was a calculated lie. He hadn't rescued me from ruin. He had orchestrated my family's downfall just to trap me in a cage of false gratitude. A raw, agonizing scream tore from my throat as the sheer weight of his monstrous betrayal shattered my soul. Clutching my chest as hot tears streamed down my face, I swore that I would tear Zeppelin Devonshire apart piece by piece. But before the echoes of my rage could fade, the heavy double doors of the study violently burst open. There stood Zeppelin himself, his eyes widening in mock surprise as he took in the sight of his ruined wife on the floor. Stepping into the room with a sickeningly sweet smile, he called me his dear, his voice dripping with venomous amusement. I clutched the incriminating papers tightly in my fist, my entire body shaking with an all-consuming hatred for the monster before me. Standing up to confront him, I demanded to know how he could ruthlessly destroy my life and everyone I had ever loved. He casually strode closer, warning me to be careful, mockingly suggesting that the sharp edges of the paper might cut my face. Snatching the documents from my grip, he dismissed the damning evidence of his crimes as nothing more than a trivial matter. With a chillingly smug grin, he leaned in and whispered that everything he did had been done entirely for my sake. He walked past me, casually explaining that my old friends were beneath my station and that he had simply removed them from my life. Pulling me tightly against his chest, he whispered that he only ever wanted to help my struggling father, painting himself as our savior. I shoved him away in pure disgust, the horrifying truth of his elaborate scheme replaying in my mind. He had hired a con man to swindle my father, only to step in as a generous benefactor and trap my family in an endless cycle of debt. It was a suffocating web of financial ruin, ensuring the Obelia family could never escape his absolute control. While my father was foolish, Zeppelin's calculated malice had deliberately engineered our complete annihilation. Grabbing my face in a painful grip, his tone turned dark and threatening as he warned me to behave myself. He whispered the ultimate threat. If I dared to rebel, Alice would pay with her life, proving he had already weaponized my only remaining weakness. Under the suffocating pressure of his threats, I forced myself to swallow the bitter rage rising in my throat, clenching my fists so tightly my nails bit into my palms as I quietly submitted to his terms. With a sickeningly patronizing smile, Zeppelin leaned down and pressed a mockingly gentle kiss to my forehead, praising my compliance as if granting me a grand mercy. The overwhelming trauma and the devastating revelations of that night took a massive toll on my body, dragging me into a deep, feverish illness that left me bedridden for days. When I finally opened my heavy eyes, the light of the morning pierced through my room, and a familiar face filled with worry hovered over me, calling out my name in relief. Seeing Alicia sitting at my bedside, nursing me back to health, my mind reeled with a storm of conflicting memories from our turbulent past. She spoke with such soft, convincing worry, claiming she had been desperately anxious that something terrible had happened to me in her absence. In my past life, it was this exact facade of warmth and sisterly affection that had kept me from ever truly hating her, completely blinding me to her true nature. I had been completely oblivious to the venomous desires brewing beneath her sweet smiles, allowing myself to be manipulated time and time again as she systematically took my place. Step by step, she had alienated me from everyone who ever supported me, positioning herself right by Zeppelin's side to strip away my dignity. She had even opened the manor gates to let me escape in my past life, making me believe she was my savior, when in reality, she was only clearing her own path to the top. It was all a calculated play. She wanted me gone so she could claim the status, the title, and the power of the first wife for herself. The heavy silence in the bedroom grew thick as I stared at her, the warmth of her present care clashing violently with the cold betrayal of my memories. Breaking the silence, Alicia looked down nervously, clutching her skirts as she softly asked if I hated her for taking the count away from me. I offered her a chillingly calm smile, reassuring her with a lie, though internally, the memories of her holding my previous child at the very end burned like hot coals. Sensing my emotional distance, Alicia's tone shifted, noting with growing insecurity that I was speaking formally to her again, unlike the close sisters we used to be. She quickly began to make excuses, pleading that as a mere maid in the past, she had been powerless to refuse the Count's forceful advances. Coldly cutting her off, I reminded her that I had offered her a completely different path, one that would have kept her safe and independent. I vividly recalled the day I found out she was pregnant, when I begged her to flee, offering her a house and a lifetime of financial security to escape Zeppelin's clutches. But she had stubbornly rejected my kindness, refusing to be treated like a child and insisting on making her own decisions for her future. I looked her dead in the eye, my voice laced with ice as I told her to take full responsibility for the choices she had made. She flinched, her cheeks turning pale as she frantically tried to shut down the conversation, unable to face the harsh reality of her own greed. Getting out of bed, I coolly noted that there was no point in open hostility, especially since our husband would detest any discord in his household. If she was still so utterly blinded by her ambition, then I would let her walk straight into the trap she had dug for herself. Changing my demeanor instantly, I offered a bright, friendly smile, thanking her for nursing me and promising her a gift for her devotion. I retrieved a luxurious red velvet case, opening it to reveal a shimmering array of priceless jewels and gold. I generously invited her to pick any piece she desired, testing the depths of her insatiable greed. But as she reached for the tray, I feigned surprise, lifting a stunning, sparkling diamond necklace from the box. I murmured that it was a precious heirloom Zeppelin had given directly to me, making it far too significant to give away as a mere thank you gift. Watching her eyes practically devour the sparkling piece, I added a subtle, venomous sting, noting that a second wife could never hope to inherit such a prestigious symbol of the household. Before she could recover from the insult, the bedroom door swung open to reveal Zeppelin himself, his calculating eyes immediately scanning the tense room. He strolled in, completely ignoring Alicia as he inspected my recovery, commenting with superficial relief that my skin was healing well. He leaned close, grabbing my chin with a possessive grip, and remarked that I needed to look flawless for the upcoming victory banquet. Hearing the word banquet, Alicia gasped in delight, her eyes lighting up at the prospect of attending a grand high society party. She clutched her face in excitement, already babbling about the magnificent dress she would need to order for such an event. Zeppelin let out a cruel, mocking laugh, instantly shattering her delusions as he told her she would not be attending any such gathering. His eyes turned cold and dismissive as he brutally reminded her of her place, sneering that a mere commoner had no right to stand among high nobility. Grabbing her shoulder, he ordered her to stay quietly at home and play with the cheap trinkets he threw her way, reducing her to nothing more than a kept pet. Trembling with humiliation, Alicia desperately begged him for a family heirloom of her own to prove her status. Seizing the opportunity, I chimed in with mock innocence, apologizing to Zeppelin for showing Alicia my heirloom and causing a misunderstanding. Zeppelin rubbed his temple in sheer annoyance, declaring once and for all that the prestigious heirlooms belonged solely to the first wife, Rebecca. Alicia erupted into a desperate, tearful tantrum, screaming that she was a countess too, until Zeppelin lost his patience and violently dragged her out of the room. Before they could disappear down the hall, I raised my voice, demanding they halt so I could ask one critical question. I looked past them, asking why they had cut their week-long honeymoon so short to return to the manor early. Furious and wanting to hurt Zeppelin's pride, Alicia spat back that her husband had been forced to sell off their honeymoon villa to a duke just to purchase a few paintings. My breath caught in my throat as the pieces of the puzzle began to click together in my mind. The name of that particular nobleman instantly sparked a brilliant flame of hope in my chest. The stage was finally being set for his ruin. With the imperial banquet approaching and the Duke now fully entangled in Zeppelin's financial mess, my path to vengeance was clearer than ever before. On the night of the grand banquet, I stood before Zeppelin, draped in a magnificent, glittering blue gown that commanded the entire room. Zeppelin looked up from his seat, his eyes widening in genuine awe as he complimented my breathtaking appearance. He smiled warmly, murmuring that seeing me like this brought back memories of my 17th birthday party, completely unaware that this very night would mark the beginning of his absolute downfall. 17 years ago, on a bitterly cold winter night, a young Zeppelin stepped out into the freezing air, his heart as cold and lifeless as the snow falling around him. To him, the grand parties, the fake smiles, and the hollow noble titles were nothing but a tedious, mind-numbing bore that offered absolutely no purpose. But just as he prepared to turn his back on the trivial gathering, a sudden burst of pure, genuine laughter echoed from the courtyard below, instantly breaking through his numb indifference. Looking down from the balcony, he saw a group of young noble girls playing carelessly in the freshly fallen snow, their voices bright with innocent joy. It was there that he saw her for the very first time, Rebecca, radiating a brilliant, effortless beauty that seemed to warm the freezing winter night itself. As if sensing his intense gaze, Rebecca paused her laughter and turned her brilliant blue eyes toward the balcony, capturing his attention in an instant. In that silent, frozen moment, their eyes locked and an unspoken connection formed that would alter the course of their lives forever. Rebecca offered him a warm, dazzling smile, completely unaware that her innocent gesture had just ignited a dark, obsessive flame deep within his soul. Gripping the cold stone railing, Zeppelin felt his hollow chest surge with a terrifying new desire. He had finally found a grand purpose to break his monotonous existence. A chilling, possessive grin spread across his face as he stared down at her, already imagining the flawless, beautiful children they would create to secure his legacy. To Zeppelin, beauty was the ultimate, absolute meaning of life, and the breathtaking Rebecca was the perfect doll he needed to construct his grand kingdom. Yet, winning her over proved far more difficult than he ever anticipated, as she possessed a sharp intellect and a stubborn resolve that resisted his easy manipulation. But his patience paid off, and after a decade of calculated isolation and insidious psychological warfare, he had finally molded her into a broken, dependent shadow of her former self. And now, by introducing the young and naive Alicia to the household, he would force Rebecca into a constant, agonizing loop of comparison to keep her desperate for his approval. As long as she remained obedient, silent, and beautifully broken, she would remain his perfect, prized possession, ready to bear him the ultimate heir. With a smug, triumphant sneer, Zeppelin prepared to lead her out, confident that his flawless, horrific kingdom was finally on the verge of completion. Meanwhile, far from Zeppelin's sick games, the legendary and imposing estate of the Johannes Grand Duchy stood tall, harboring its own dark, ancient secrets. Inside the grand estate, a gloved hand casually tossed aside a useless stack of intelligence papers, treating the secrets of the empire as mere trash. Duke Julian Johannes looked up with a cold, piercing gaze, demanding to know if his scouts had any actual useful information to offer him. His trusted advisor sighed, explaining that greedy opportunists and fraudulent storytellers had been flooding the gates ever since rumors of their power spread. But there was no time to deal with frauds, as the grand victory banquet was starting, and the guest of honor could not afford to be absent from his own celebration. Julian let out a weary sigh, grumbling that he never would have volunteered for the front lines if he had known the victory would bring such tedious diplomatic duties. To him, the entire war had been a pathetic farce planned by the emperor himself, as the supposed rebels surrendered the moment Julian drew his magical sword. His advisor frantically begged him to hold his tongue and attend the banquet, warning that pushing the emperor's patience any further would lead to absolute ruin. Patting the sleek black cat resting on his lap, Julian merely smirked, completely unfazed by the threat of imperial wrath. He confidently declared that as long as the ancient goddess Defria watched over the Johannes bloodline, even the crown itself was powerless to touch them. But behind his arrogant boast lay a dark, agonizing truth. The divine protection they flaunted was actually a horrific, inescapable curse. Centuries ago, the founding Duke Johannes had stood at the vanguard of a brutal civil war, earning the goddess Defria's favor and securing infinite wealth for his descendants. Under her divine grace, the once shunned black cat became a revered symbol of good fortune, but the price of such eternal prosperity was staggeringly high. As generations passed, the spoiled descendants of Johannes forgot their sacred gratitude, committing acts of vile debauchery inside the goddess's very temples. Enraged by their mocking arrogance, the goddess twisted her blessing into a horrific curse, demanding that their children pay the ultimate price for her stolen favor. From that day forward, every heir born to the Johannes family was forced to share their soul, their agonizing pain, and their very life force with the sacred cat. The insatiable beast fed directly on the heir's divine power, dragging them to an early grave and forcing the desperate family to constantly marry off young children to produce replacements. Julian had been no exception to this cruel cycle, his young shoulders burdened with a heavy golden collar of absolute expectation from the moment he could walk. Standing before him, his desperate father had drilled the harsh reality into his mind, reminding him that he possessed the strongest divine power in the family's history. His father demanded he marry immediately to secure the next generation, but a young Julian fiercely rebelled, refusing to drag innocent women into their family's living hell. But his father merely grabbed his shoulders in a tight, desperate grip, coldly warning him that no one, not even the strongest heir, could ever escape the goddess's shackles. The terrifying words echoed in Julian's mind, cementing a deep, paralyzing dread that would haunt his thoughts for the rest of his youth. On her tragic deathbed, his mother had wept bitterly, whispering a final, desperate warning. He must never, under any circumstances, allow himself to fall in love. Shortly after her passing, his father had dragged him to her very grave, coldly introducing a new stepmother to continue the endless, agonizing cycle of breeding heirs. Back in the present, Julian stepped onto his carriage, tossing aside yet another desperate marriage proposal with utter, icy contempt. He was determined to break the chains of his tragic bloodline, refusing to simply surrender to the wretched fate his ancestors had carved out for him. For if he failed to produce a direct heir, the horrific curse would pass to his beloved sister Lily's innocent child, a nightmare he would never allow to happen. With a fierce, unwavering resolve burning in his golden eyes, Julian vowed that the horrific Johannes curse would end permanently with his own death. Meanwhile, the Grand Palace ballroom was alive with music and whispers as the high nobility gathered for the magnificent victory celebration. Walking arm in arm, Zeppelin and Rebecca made their grand entrance, presenting themselves as the picture-perfect couple while a hidden storm brewed beneath the surface. Rebecca paid no attention to her husband's smug posturing, her eyes scanning the crowd with intense, quiet desperation for the one man who could help her destroy him. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the ballroom creaked open, and a hush fell over the entire room as Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. There, stepping into the brilliant light, stood Duke Julian Johannes, his eyes immediately locking onto Rebecca in a silent, explosive clash of wills. As the Imperial Herald announced his grand arrival, the stage was finally set for a dangerous, destiny-altering alliance that would tear the Empire apart. Julian stepped forward, offering a flawless, practiced bow of gratitude to the ruler of the Empire, masking his deep-seated contempt with perfect noble etiquette. But the pleasantries were cut short as the Emperor turned, a thin, knowing smile playing on his lips as he prepared to introduce Julian to someone unexpected. Stepping forward with practiced grace was Princess Catherine, her striking crimson hair and serene, perfect smile instantly signaling her high standing in the imperial court. Watching her, Julian sneered inwardly, instantly seeing right through the Emperor's obvious, desperate power play. For years, the Retendus Empire had been choking under the overwhelming, absolute authority of the Church, with the high nobility and common folk completely under the Pope's sway. Unlike his passive predecessors, this current emperor was fiercely desperate to claw back imperial control, and he saw the legendary Johannes bloodline as his ultimate weapon to achieve it. To bind the Grand Duchy to the crown, the emperor was willing to ignore Julian's carefully constructed reputation as a depraved, unpredictable Casanova. He was actively planning to marry off the princess to Julian, weaponizing his own daughter to secure an unbreakable alliance with the powerful Johannes family. Julian stared back with cold, silent calculation, refusing to let himself be treated as a mere pawn in their desperate political games. Seeking to seal the trap immediately, the emperor urged Julian to share the highly symbolic first dance of the evening with the beautiful princess. Trapped under the watchful eyes of the entire court, Julian had no choice but to reach out and gently take Princess Catherine's hand, stepping onto the grand stage. A smug, triumphant smirk spread across the emperor's face, confident that he had finally cornered the elusive and dangerous duke. But Julian's mind was already spinning with counter-strategies, realizing that marrying a royal princess might actually shield him from the church's relentless demands for a breeding heir. As they swept across the polished ballroom floor, Julian moved with flawless, mesmerizing grace, keeping his true intentions perfectly hidden. Yet, as he looked at Catherine's bright, innocent face, the tragic, sorrowful memory of his beloved sister Lily flashed before his eyes, fueling his quiet rage. From the shadows of the ballroom, a pair of sharp, brilliant blue eyes watched their elegant movements with intense, burning desperation. Rebecca stood at the edge of the glittering crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs as she prepared to make her ultimate move. But before she could step forward, a cold, bruising grip suddenly seized her chin, violently snapping her back to her horrific reality. Zeppelin leaned down, his pale eyes burning with dangerous possession as he demanded she look only at him. Gasping for breath, Rebecca quickly stammered an excuse of sudden dizziness, only for Zeppelin to coldly remind her that she belonged entirely to him and must behave like a perfect doll. Forcing her lips into a submissive, radiant smile, Rebecca whispered her obedience, hiding the absolute hatred churning in her chest. Satisfied with her broken compliance, Zeppelin ordered her to stay put and remain perfectly still before turning his back on her. Watching him walk away to mingle with the other nobles, a fierce, triumphant thrill surged through Rebecca. She finally had her golden opportunity. Across the room, Julian politely excused himself from the princess, raising a glass of wine to block out the suffocating whispers of the court. But just as he took a sip, he noticed the sudden absence of the sacred, watchful cats that usually swarmed the grand ballroom. Before he could contemplate their strange disappearance, a soft, deliberate rustle behind him warned him that someone had followed him deep into the shadows. A low, shocking whisper pierced the quiet corner, accurately naming Leo as the one true sacred cat that shared his very soul, while the others were mere decoys. Julian's heart stopped, his golden eyes widening in pure horror, as the stranger warned him not to make it obvious they were conversing. Keeping his face perfectly calm, Julian whipped his head around, demanding to know the identity of the bold intruder standing behind the marble pillar. Behind him, the mysterious blonde woman calmly stated she would be blunt, completely unfazed by his intimidating aura. With utter, terrifying confidence, she whispered the one phrase Julian never expected to hear. She knew exactly how to break his family's eternal curse. Julian's blood ran cold as he hissed back, fiercely denying her words and warning her against spouting such dangerous treason. But the woman was relentless, calmly revealing her absolute knowledge of his soul's fatal connection to the cat and his desperate search for storytellers to break the cycle. Panic and suspicion flared in Julian's chest as he desperately wondered who had sent this highly informed woman, the emperor or the temple itself. She pushed even further, exposing his carefully crafted womanizer persona as a total lie to avoid ever producing a tragic heir. Cold sweat dripped down Julian's neck as he realized this mysterious stranger held his entire life and the future of his bloodline in the palm of her hand. Leaning closer, she murmured that she was offering him the one golden opportunity he had been desperately chasing his entire life. Shaken to his core, Julian turned to face her fully, his voice low and dangerous as he demanded to know her ultimate price. Rebecca smirked, laying out her singular, shocking condition. He must publicly ask her to dance in front of the emperor himself. Stunned by the sheer audacity of her request, Julian desperately called out, demanding to know her name before she could slip away. But Rebecca simply spun around, her glittering blue gown flowing behind her as she confidently walked back toward the bright lights of the ballroom. Julian stared after her disappearing figure, his mind completely reeled by the sudden, chaotic variable that had just entered his life. Glancing back over her shoulder, Rebecca offered him one final brilliant smile, fully aware that she had successfully snared the most powerful man in the empire. Suddenly, the dark, suffocating shadow of Zeppelin loomed over her once more, grumbling about Duke Latranus pestering him. But the moment Zeppelin's eyes drifted past her, his smug expression instantly twisted into a furious, venomous glare. Striding forward with hostile arrogance, Zeppelin spat out a harsh insult, demanding to know why Julian was staring so insolently at another man's wife. Julian merely swirled his wine, his voice dripping with utter disdain as he casually mocked Zeppelin's pathetic, faint presence in the room. A vein throbbed on Zeppelin's forehead as he gripped his glass, his entire body trembling with a murderous, long-standing hatred for Julian Johannes. In an instant, a bitter, humiliating memory flashed through Zeppelin's mind of the day a young Julian had violently pushed him away, calling him a hideous thing. Staring at the golden, untouchable heir who had always treated him like garbage, Zeppelin vowed that he would see the arrogant duke utterly ruined, completely unaware that his own perfect kingdom was already crumbling from within. Zeppelin stared coldly at the artwork on the wall, his sneer deepening as he silently admitted that Julian Johannes certainly possessed a refined eye for beauty. In a sudden, aggressive show of possessiveness, Zeppelin gripped Rebecca's arm, his sharp, demanding voice leaving absolutely no room for defiance as he claimed her as his property. Turning his back with smug arrogance, Zeppelin dragged Rebecca away, convinced that an untouchable duke like Julian could never lay a finger on his most prized masterpiece. As they walked past, the ballroom erupted into a flurry of hushed, scandalous whispers, with onlookers gossiping about the dark, suffocating confinement Rebecca endured behind closed doors. But the low murmur of the crowd was suddenly silenced by the rhythmic, heavy sound of footsteps echoing with absolute authority across the marble floor. The emperor stepped forward, his sharp, calculating gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles, with the high-ranking Princess Catherine trailing gracefully behind him. Feeling the sudden shift in the room's tension, Zeppelin confronted Julian, his voice dripping with venomous hostility as he demanded to know what business the Duke had with them. Julian merely smirked, his golden eyes shining with a dangerous, mocking light that sent a visible shiver of unease straight through Zeppelin. Without a shred of hesitation, Julian calmly dropped a devastating social bomb, declaring that his business lay entirely with Zeppelin's beautiful wife. Boldly ignoring the Count, Julian extended his gloved hand to Rebecca, his smooth, mesmerizing gesture challenging the very boundaries of high society. A collective gasp rippled through the grand hall as the onlookers watched in absolute disbelief at the Duke's sheer unparalleled audacity. Rebecca stared at him, her heart pounding as she marveled at Julian's breathtaking composure, realizing that this man was far more formidable than she had ever imagined. Panicking, Zeppelin leaned in to command Rebecca to refuse, but his desperate attempt at control was cut short by a sudden, booming laughter echoing from behind. The emperor himself intervened, walking forward with a mocking grin as he loudly chided Zeppelin for clutching his wife with such pathetic, suffocating desperation. Zeppelin tried to stammer a desperate defense, but the emperor's sharp, warning tone instantly silenced his protests, reminding him of his place. Under the guise of a casual dance, the emperor watched Julian closely, eagerly searching for any hidden weakness in the untouchable duke that he could exploit later. Whispers flared once more as the court recalled how lively Rebecca had been before her marriage, a tragic detail that only fueled Julian's quiet, burning rage. Trapped under the emperor's watchful gaze, Zeppelin had no choice but to yield, coldly allowing only a single dance before stepping back in bitter humiliation. Julian didn't even look at the defeated Count, making it piercingly clear that his invitation was meant solely for Rebecca and her alone. Locking her brilliant blue eyes onto his, Rebecca offered a subtle, knowing glance that signaled her complete readiness to play this high-stakes game. Standing in the shadow of his own undoing, Zeppelin could only watch in silent, trembling fury as his absolute control shattered into a million pieces. With a gentle but firm grasp, Julian took her delicate hand, officially drawing her onto the glittering floor and into his dangerous orbit. He pressed his lips to her knuckles in a flawless, mocking show of knightly etiquette, sealing their public pact before the entire imperial court. As they swept into the rhythm of the waltz, Julian leaned down, demanding to know the true, shocking nature of the bargain she had proposed. Without missing a single step, Rebecca looked him dead in the eye and delivered a stunning revelation. She was filing for a complete divorce. She didn't stop there, immediately pushing her hand further by boldly proposing that Julian marry her instead. Julian's mind raced with calculation as Rebecca explained that the relentless temple would soon choke him with heavy pressure to choose a breeding bride. Spinning her elegantly across the polished floor, Julian demanded to know how a mere noblewoman could possibly possess such highly classified information. Rebecca simply smiled a serene, dangerous smile, stating her sources didn't matter. She wasn't asking for his heart, only an alliance of absolute power. Their hands locked tightly together, the flawless grace of their movements completely masking the explosive, treasonous plot being whispered between them. She moved with effortless, breathtaking elegance, fully aware that she held the absolute leverage in this dangerous political dance. Julian stared at her radiant, smiling face, desperately trying to discern if this mysterious woman was his ultimate salvation or his final ruin. As their hands shifted in a seamless transition, Rebecca prepared to state the final, non-negotiable term of her shocking proposition. Lifting her effortlessly, Julian felt the sudden electric tension between them as she prepared to deliver the killing blow. She looked down at him with an aura of absolute majesty, her brilliant blue eyes shining with a fierce, untamed resolve. Julian's breath caught in his throat, his stoic mask momentarily slipping as he waited for her to reveal her true price. In a low, chilling whisper, Rebecca demanded the one thing she lived for, the absolute crushing downfall of the entire House of Devonshire. Leaning incredibly close to his ear, her voice carried a haunting, cold promise of vengeance that sent a shiver down his spine. Suspicious, Julian demanded to know why he should trust her words, only for Rebecca to counter with terrifying, unshakable confidence. She hid his most vulnerable, agonizing secret, whispering that he would have to trust her if he wanted to save his beloved little sister from the eternal curse. Absolute panic flared in Julian's chest as his eyes widened in pure horror. How could this woman possibly know about Lily's secret torment? Staring into the deep, brilliant blue of her eyes, he searched for any hint of deceit, only to realize with mounting dread that she was telling the absolute truth. Sensing her victory, Rebecca laid out her secret contact method, instructing him to send Leo to her estate and place a yellow flower by his window as a signal. With a parting, triumphant smile, she stepped back, leaving the powerful Duke completely and utterly snared in her brilliant web. But before Julian could utter a word, Zeppelin suddenly lunged forward, violently seizing Rebecca's arm as his fragile sanity snapped completely. Julian watched their abrupt departure with a storm brewing in his golden eyes, his mind entirely consumed by the chaotic variable that had just rewritten his destiny. Dragging her out into the cold night, Zeppelin shoved Rebecca violently into their waiting carriage, his abusive rage boiling over. Rebecca sat in the dim light of the carriage, her face perfectly calm and icy, completely unfazed by his pathetic, desperate display of violence. Screaming hysterical threats through the carriage door, Zeppelin slammed it shut with a deafening crash, promising her a horrific punishment once they returned home. As the carriage rattled away into the dark, Zeppelin stood alone in the moonlight, completely unaware that the wheels of his absolute ruin had already begun to turn. Heavily measured footsteps echoed through the quiet terrace as Julian calmly approached the seething Count, his presence radiating an unbothered, commanding power. Turning with a venomous sneer, Zeppelin hissed a pathetic warning about coveting another man's property, only for Julian to coldly remind him that a human being could never be claimed as a mere object. Infuriated by the brutal reality check, Zeppelin's face twisted into a mask of pure rage as he snarled a desperate insult at the arrogant young Duke. Julian didn't even blink, casually mocking the Count's advanced age before delivering the ultimate insult by mockingly addressing him as Uncle Count. Suddenly, a pair of stray cats hissed fiercely from the darkness, their claws out as if mirroring the venomous tension suffocating the terrace. With a smooth, disarming smile, Julian gently placated the animals, telling them to be good while silently calculating his next move against the trembling Count. Zeppelin recoiled in sheer disbelief, utterly humiliated by the Duke's casual disregard for his presence and authority. Pointing a trembling finger, Zeppelin spat out a final, desperate command for Julian to stay away from Rebecca, violently asserting his fading ownership. But before Zeppelin could finish his grand threat, he violently sneezed, his fragile dignity instantly shattered by a stray speck of cat hair as he scurried away in embarrassment. Just as the Count retreated, Leo rushed onto the terrace in a panic, desperately calling out to the Duke to ensure his safety. Julian turned back to his loyal aide, his calm, unreadable expression masking the massive storm that had just been unleashed. Without a single trace of hesitation, Julian dropped an absolute bombshell, calmly declaring that he was getting married, completely ignoring Leo's horrified realization that the bride was already another man's wife. As a heavy, suffocating rain began to pour over the dark city, a carriage rattled back to the ominous Devonshire estate, carrying Rebecca back into her gilded cage. Inside her dimly lit room, Rebecca stood silently by the rain-slicked window, her mind racing as the dangerous wheels of her political plot began to turn. Sensing the unusual quiet, her maid Alice watched her closely, noting that her mistress was uncharacteristically silent after returning so early from the banquet. Stepping closer, Alice cautiously asked if something had occurred at the palace to prompt such a sudden, quiet departure. A mysterious, cold smile played on Rebecca's lips, a silent sign that everything was moving precisely according to her grand design. Turning her gaze back to the pouring rain, she casually revealed that she had danced with the powerful Duke under the Emperor's direct command. Alice gasped in mock excitement, eagerly asking if the experience with the untouchable Duke had thrilled her, her eyes shining with an unsettling curiosity. But Rebecca's expression instantly hardened, a deep shadow of unease crossing her face as she prepared herself for the inevitable nightmare about to walk through the door. Right on cue, a booming, furious voice shattered the silence of her chambers as Zeppelin screamed her name from the hallway. Rebecca stood tall, taking a final deep breath, as she whispered to Alice that her tormentor had finally arrived to exact his twisted vengeance. The heavy doors burst open with a violent crash, and Zeppelin marched in, his eyes wide with a manic, abusive fury that promised absolute pain. Playing the role of the submissive wife perfectly, Rebecca immediately dropped to her knees, allowing Zeppelin to tower over her with disgusting superiority. Zeppelin sneered down at her, declaring that her submission would not erase the absolute humiliation he had suffered at the imperial banquet. With a sickening click, Zeppelin snatched a dark leather whip from his desk, his eyes gleaming with the sadistic urge to crush her spirit once and for all. Raising the weapon high above his head, he screamed that someone had to pay a steep price for the disgrace of that night. Rebecca braced for the impact, but before the leather could slice through her skin, Alice suddenly threw herself forward, shielding her mistress from the brutal blow. The whip cracked mercilessly, tearing into Alice's flesh as Zeppelin roared about holding the servants responsible for failing to guard Rebecca's virtue. Horrified but acting fast, Rebecca threw herself at Zeppelin's feet, desperately begging him to stop the torture and claiming full responsibility for the mistake. Pleased by her desperate begging, Zeppelin lowered the whip with a smug grin, reminding her that she should have submitted to him from the very beginning. Kneeling down, he roughly grabbed her jaw, whispering a chilling reminder that her beauty was a curse that constantly drew unwanted pests to her side. Gently tapping her cheek in a terrifying show of fake affection, he demanded she reject any man who approached her in the future, sealing her confinement. Turning on his heel, the Count coldly announced he would spend the night in another woman's bed, ordering the other maids to heal Alice and wash away the defilement of Julian's touch. As the door slammed shut, Rebecca remained kneeling in the dark, the heavy silence of the room suffocating her as she processed the horrific abuse. Wiping a single tear from her cheek, her sorrow instantly vanished, replaced by an icy, calculated determination to see the House of Devonshire burn. Tending to her wounded maid, Rebecca looked down at Alice's bloody, torn back, her heart heavy with guilt for the pain her loyal servant had endured. Alice weakly looked up, offering a tearful smile as she claimed that her own pain meant absolutely nothing as long as her beloved lady was safe. Overwhelmed, Rebecca pulled Alice into a tight, protective embrace, whispering her name in a soft, trembling voice. But as she held her close, a chilling, terrifying thought suddenly seized Rebecca's mind. Why had Alice smiled? A dark, horrific memory flashed in Rebecca's mind of the exact moment Zeppelin had raised his heavy whip to strike. In that split second, Alice had lay on the floor, her face twisted not in fear, but into a sinister, triumphant grin. Snapping back to reality, Rebecca's grip tightened like a vice as she violently shoved Alice back, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper as she demanded to know the truth. Her mind raced back to the day Zeppelin had urgently stormed into the study, a sudden, frantic action that had first planted the seeds of doubt in her mind. Why would a man who never hurried rush so desperately, unless he had been tipped off by a spy operating directly under Rebecca's nose? Squeezing her fingers around Alice's throat, Rebecca watched her maid gasp for air, her angelic facade completely shattered as she faced her mistress's cold fury. It all made sense now. Zeppelin had always instantly fired any maid Rebecca showed even the slightest attachment to, ensuring she remained utterly isolated. Yet Alice had remained by her side from the very first day, an impossible miracle that Rebecca had implicitly accepted as loyalty. The sickening truth was finally clear. Alice had only survived because she was Zeppelin's personal spy, feeding him information from the shadows. As Rebecca stared down at the gasping traitor, she realized that even Alice's ultimate sacrifice was a calculated lie, leaving her to wonder what terrifying game her enemy was truly playing. Desperation and anger fought for dominance in Rebecca's chest as she stared down at her bleeding maid, coldly commanding the traitor to run for her life. Gasping for air, Alicia clutched her bruised throat in terror, her voice trembling as she feigned ignorance to her mistress's sudden accusation. But Rebecca stood firm, her gaze slicing through the lies as she warned Alicia that she had forfeited her trust and would face the Count's lethal wrath if she stayed. With absolute finality, she declared that she would ensure the Count dismissed her by morning, leaving no room for negotiation. The cold ultimatum hung heavily in the air as Rebecca whispered the terrifying truth. Alicia had only until dawn to vanish. Stunned by the sudden mercy, the exposed spy scoffed, her mask completely slipping as she mockingly asked why Rebecca wouldn't even demand an explanation for her betrayal. Standing tall, Rebecca coldly replied that excuses changed nothing, urging the girl to waste no more precious time and flee. The hollow pity ignited a spark of pure venom in Alicia's eyes, and she spat out bitter insults, accusing the rich countess of being ungrateful for her gilded life. Rebecca's heart wrenched at the sheer delusion of her maid, who fiercely claimed that the abusive count actually adored his tortured wife. Alicia's envy boiled over as she ranted about the expensive dresses and jewels, revealing her sick, desperate desire to steal Rebecca's horrific place. Flashing a manic, triumphant grin, the traitor dared her mistress to kill her, mockingly claiming that the soft-hearted countess lacked the stomach for murder. Before the venomous words could fully leave her mouth, a heavy wooden tub shattered violently over Alicia's head with a sickening crack. The traitor collapsed instantly onto the floor amidst the splintered wood, her arrogant threats silenced in a single brutal second. Out of the shadows stepped Kana, another maid in the estate, who calmly announced that Rebecca's bath was ready as if nothing had happened. Gripping the unconscious spy by her hair, Kana coldly assured her lady that she would personally dispose of the treacherous pest. Rebecca watched in silent shock as the mysterious maid effortlessly dragged the limp traitor out of the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The heavy silence of the chamber closed in on Rebecca, the weight of the endless betrayals finally crushing her spirit. Sinking slowly to her knees, her trembling hands clutched her chest as the harsh reality of her isolation set in. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered to the empty room that she had tried to show mercy, but the fragile peace was now permanently shattered. A chilling realization crept into her mind. Kana's ruthless intervention meant she was undoubtedly another one of Zeppelin's cold-blooded agents. A bitter, self-deprecating laugh escaped her lips as she realized she was still foolishly worrying about the fate of the girl who had betrayed her. The first tears finally broke free, splashing silently onto her elegant gown as her composure crumbled in the dark. Her shoulders shook as the agonizing truth washed over her, stripping away the last remnants of her fragile hope. Surrounded by the oppressive shadows of the Devonshire estate, Rebecca wept bitterly, realizing she was now completely and utterly alone in this house of monsters. Outside, a torrential rain lashed against the imposing stone walls of the mansion, mirroring the absolute despair locked within its chambers. Hours bled into the night, and the silent bathwater grew ice cold. Yet the mysterious maid who had taken Alicia away never returned. Pushing past her grief, Rebecca slowly rose from the floor, her tear-stained face hardening with a dangerous new resolve. Crossing the dark room, she approached the rain-slicked window and pushed it wide open, letting the freezing night air rush in. Reaching out, she carefully placed a vibrant yellow flower on the sill, the secret signal she had promised the powerful Duke. Staring out into the storm, a quiet, terrifying mantra echoed in her soul, reminding her that she had to become absolutely unbreakable to survive. Her blue eyes flashed with a cold, predatory light as she vowed to harden her heart until it was strong enough to shatter any obstacle in her path. With a dangerous, quiet confidence, she whispered that she had nothing left to lose, making her more lethal than any enemy could possibly imagine. Down below in the rain-swept gardens, the dark shadows began to shift as the wheels of her dangerous alliance set in motion. Through the pouring rain, Kana silently dragged Alicia's limp body toward the looming, abandoned glass house on the edge of the estate. Shoving her inside, Kana let the traitor collapse onto the cold stone floor of the eerie sanctuary. Groaning in pain, Alicia slowly blinked her eyes open, panic seizing her chest as she demanded to know who her captor was. Clutching her throbbing head, she frantically looked around for Rebecca, her arrogant composure completely gone as dread set in. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, a colossal, weeping angel statue towered over her, casting a suffocating shadow of doom. Recognition hit her like a physical blow, her face turning pale as she realized exactly where she had been taken. Terrified of the horrors that lay beneath, Alicia fell to her knees and desperately begged Kana for mercy, offering anything if she would just spare her from the basement. But her pleading was violently cut short as a heavy blow struck her temple, sending her crashing back into the dark. She collapsed into unconsciousness once more, her desperate plea silenced for good. From the shadows, Count Zeppelin stepped forward with a chilling, satisfied sneer, praising Kana for her brutal efficiency. Glancing at a portrait of his beautiful wife, the sadistic Count smiled wickedly, ordering Kana to become Rebecca's new maid and spy on her every breath. Bowing her head in perfect obedience, Kana softly swore to watch the Countess's every move and report back to him. With a casual wave of his hand, Zeppelin coldly dismissed her, commanding his silent guard to drag the useless broken Alicia away. The hooded assassin lifted the limp spy into the shadows, vanishing into the damp, dark corridors of the estate. Kana stood alone in the dark greenhouse, her gaze unreadable as she prepared to play her dangerous new role in Rebecca's life. Back in the Grand Master bedroom, Rebecca suddenly jolted awake, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs as she sat up. Her breath hitched as a dark, menacing shadow loomed over her bed, whispering a chilling question that froze the blood in her veins. Morning brought no safety, only a new shadow in the form of a maid introducing herself as Kana, ready to begin her service. Instantly, Rebecca's mind went on high alert, recognizing her as the very girl who had brutally silenced Alicia the night before, a dangerous wildcard who had never even existed in her past life. As Kana stood silently by the bed, Rebecca felt a cold sweat break out, realizing that the web of spies surrounding her had just grown even more unpredictable. The silent tension stretched to a breaking point as Kana began to brush Rebecca's long blonde hair, every stroke feeling like a calculated, unspoken threat. Despite the terror gripping her, Rebecca had to admit that the girl's hairdressing skills were absolutely flawless, a sharp contrast to the clumsy, erratic habits of Alicia. Staring into the mirror, Rebecca's mind raced with agonizing questions, wondering what horrific fate had befallen Alicia, and whether Kana had already exposed her secrets to the sadistic Count. Suddenly, a terrifying revelation struck her like a physical blow. Alicia was not just dismissed, she was dead. Kana softly whispered that the Count remained entirely ignorant of the previous night's violent confrontation, dropping a massive bombshell that left Rebecca utterly bewildered. Driven by a sudden surge of desperation, Rebecca lunged forward and violently grabbed Kana's wrist, refusing to play any more mind games. Staring fiercely into the maid's eyes, she demanded to know her true angle, fiercely accusing Kana of trying to win her favor on Zeppelin's cruel orders. With a deadly quiet intensity, Rebecca warned the new maid to flee the estate immediately, reminding her of the lethal fate that awaited any servant caught in the Count's crosshairs. Instead of cowering or fleeing, Kana merely curtsied with an unsettling, peaceful grace, as if she had expected this exact confrontation. Reaching into her apron, the mysterious maid pulled out a neatly folded piece of white fabric, claiming it was an item she cherished more than her own life. Rebecca's breath hitched as she stared down at the simple cloth, a sudden, shocking wave of recognition washing over her. With a soft, genuine smile, Kana revealed that the worn fabric was absolute proof of a forgotten miracle, the day Lady Rebecca had saved her life. Instantly, the oppressive walls of the Devonshire estate melted away, replaced by the distant memory of a warm, bustling spring morning in a crowded town. But for young Kana, that day had been a freezing nightmare as her abusive father dragged her mercilessly through the cobblestone streets. The horrific truth of her father's cruelty loomed ahead. He was dragging his own daughter to a sordid brothel to pay off his massive gambling debts. Inside the dim tavern, her father bargained callously with the cold-hearted madam, desperately trying to negotiate a high price for his terrified child. Crossing that threshold, young Kana's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the rowdy patrons, realizing her childhood was about to be destroyed. A primal instinct of survival flared deep within her, screaming that if she allowed herself to be sold into this dark place, she would never escape alive. Seizing a single split second of distraction, Kana broke free from her father's grasp and bolted into the streets, ignoring his furious, echoing roars to stop. Her small feet pounded frantically against the uneven cobblestones, driven by pure, unadulterated terror as she sprinted for freedom. Gasping for breath, she threw herself into the crowded marketplace, desperately searching for any place to hide from her relentless pursuer. Panic blinded her, and she lunged directly into the path of an oncoming carriage, the driver screaming a frantic warning as the heavy horses bore down on her. The carriage screeched to a sudden, violent halt as Kana tumbled hard onto the cold stone floor, crying out in sheer terror. Trembling violently on the ground, she shielded her face with her arms, fully expecting the carriage wheels or her furious father to crush her. But instead of violence, an incredibly gentle, angelic voice cut through her panic, softly asking if she was hurt. Lowering her arms, Kana looked up to see a beautiful, noble girl extending a hand of pure grace, looking down at her with genuine worry. For the first time in her miserable life, Kana gazed into eyes that held no malice or greed, completely spellbound by the stranger's warmth. The fragile moment was instantly shattered as her father's enraged voice boomed through the crowd, demanding to know where his runaway property had gone. Sensing the imminent danger, the young noble girl didn't hesitate for a single second, effortlessly scooping the filthy, trembling child into her arms. Kana panicked, crying out that her dirty clothes would ruin the elegant, expensive dress, but the young lady merely smiled warmly, declaring that a life was worth far more than any fabric. Carrying Kana safely into her carriage, the compassionate girl commanded her driver to rush them immediately to the Liberta Relief Shelter. With a crack of the whip, the carriage rattled away from the marketplace, leaving the abusive father and Kana's dark past far behind. Inside the moving carriage, Rebecca gently asked Kana if the screaming man outside was her father, her voice filled with deep sympathy. Shifting uncomfortably, Kana clutched her worn dress in silent shame, too terrified and embarrassed to look her savior in the eye. As Kana shrank back, Rebecca's sharp eyes caught sight of the painful, fresh blood seeping from the young girl's scraped hands. Without a second thought, Rebecca reached into her bag and retrieved a beautifully hand-embroidered handkerchief, admitting she had originally made it as a gift for someone else. With unmatched gentleness, she took Kana's injured hands and carefully wrapped the clean, soft fabric around the bleeding wounds. Looking up with a brilliant, comforting smile, Rebecca softly reassured the weeping child that the cloth would protect her until they could get proper medicine. Overwhelmed by a kindness she had never known, Kana's vision blurred with thick tears as the warmth of the touch seeped into her very soul. Rebecca held her close, promising that the Libertat Relief Shelter was a safe haven filled only with good people, and vowing that her abusive father would never be allowed near her again. That gentle touch became Kana's anchor, even after she grew up and left the shelter. Unable to ever meet her savior again, the memory of that warmth remained burned into her heart. Driven by a singular, burning desire to repay that life-saving kindness, Kanna had dedicated her entire existence to finding her way back to Lady Rebecca's side. Snapping back to the present, Kanna's voice trembled with raw emotion as tears began to spill over her cheeks, confessing that she had never forgotten her savior for a single day. Looking up at her bewildered mistress, a tearful, radiant smile broke through her composure as she whispered that she had finally found her way back. Kneeling humbly at Rebecca's feet, Kanna softly declared that she cared nothing for her own safety, pledging her absolute loyalty to Rebecca even if she was completely forgotten. Rebecca stared down in absolute shock, her mind reeling as she finally recognized the distinct hand-embroidered pattern on the handkerchief Kanna held. A bitter, painful memory flashed in Rebecca's mind of the day she had proudly presented that very same handmade gift to Count Zeppelin, only for the sadistic man to mockingly call it useless, disgusting trash. The worn handkerchief slipped from Rebecca's fingers, fluttering to the cold floor as the sheer weight of Kanna's confession settled over her. Kneeling before her in absolute humility, Kanna pleaded not for immediate trust, but simply to be utilized as a tool in Rebecca's desperate battle for survival. With a chillingly calm resolve, the maid swore to commit any violence necessary, even taking Zeppelin's life or breaking a spy's legs if her mistress commanded it. Staring at her, Rebecca's heart pounded with a mix of hope and deep-seated suspicion, wondering if this devotion was too good to be true. The traumatic memories of her past life echoed in her mind, a stark reminder of the countless betrayals she had suffered at the hands of the Count's loyal snakes. Steeling her resolve, Rebecca stood abruptly and declared that Kanna's first duty was to return to the sadistic Count and belong entirely to him. Kanna's face fell in confusion, but Rebecca quickly clarified her strategy, explaining that playing the part of a double agent was their only path to victory. To destroy Zeppelin from within, Kanna had to gain his absolute trust, acting as Rebecca's covert eyes, ears, and hands inside his inner circle. Twirling a lock of her golden hair, Rebecca's eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating light as she demanded a test to prove the maid's absolute loyalty. The test was simple, yet incredibly daring. Kanna had to sneak into the Count's quarters and bring back a messy, severed lock of his hair. Without a single shred of hesitation, Kanna pressed her hand to her chest and accepted the dangerous task, ready to risk her life for her savior. A faint, genuine smile graced Rebecca's lips as she accepted the vow, warning her new ally that betrayal would mean certain death for both of them. The tense quiet of the bedroom was suddenly shattered by a persistent tapping at the window, drawing both of their gazes to a mysterious shadow outside. Tension dissolved into recognition as Rebecca saw a familiar, sleek black cat staring back at her through the glass. Sliding the window open, Rebecca welcomed the feline messenger inside, instantly knowing that a crucial message from her secret ally had finally arrived. The clever cat stretched lazily on the wooden floor, the tiny wooden chest strapped to its collar jingling with anticipation. Rebecca's fingers trembled slightly as she clicked the small clasp open, revealing a tightly rolled secret missive nestled inside. Unrolling the parchment, she read the bold, decisive handwriting of Carlyle, the powerful Duke, demanding an immediate secret rendezvous to discuss their alliance. A triumphant smirk spread across Rebecca's face as she realized the grand pieces of her dangerous chessboard were finally falling into place. Penning a swift reply, she commanded the Duke to meet her at the Libertad Relief House this Wednesday, ordering him to wear the shabbiest clothes he could find to avoid suspicion. Across the city, Duke Carlyle stared at her bold reply with an amused, disbelieving chuckle, fascinated by a woman who dared to order him around. Setting the letter down, he gently stroked his loyal feline companion, praising Leo for successfully navigating the dangerous estate. But the temperamental cat merely turned away, clearly unimpressed by his master's praise after such a perilous journey. Carlyle sighed, playfully scolding his pet for sulking over a single errand when the stakes of their mission were so incredibly high. But his playful mood quickly vanished as his thoughts drifted back to Rebecca, her striking features stirring a deeply buried, long-forgotten memory. A haunting vision of his childhood flashed in his mind, a young, terrified girl holding a bottle in a dark, oppressive forest, asking if he was all right. He quickly shook his head to clear the thought, reminding himself that those events occurred in a secluded forest, whereas Rebecca was a high-born lady of the capital. Yet he couldn't deny the powerful pull he felt toward her, knowing that if her claims were true, she held the key to breaking his devastating curse. The black cat fixed him with a sharp, intelligent gaze, asking in their unspoken language if he was truly willing to put his life in her hands. With a cold, resolute look in his eyes, Carlyle replied that it didn't matter, as his life had already been abandoned and ruined long ago. Dismissing the heavy atmosphere, the cat trotted away toward its food bowl, grumbling that it was far too hungry to dwell on such depressing thoughts. Rubbing his temple in exhaustion, Carlyle muttered to himself, forever baffled by the erratic, independent mind of his feline partner. But the phantom warmth of Rebecca's touch lingered in his thoughts, recalling the sudden, breathless moment she had crashed into his arms. Her fierce, beautiful face burned in his mind as he remembered her shocking, desperate proposal to marry him. A wicked, intrigued smile played on his lips as he admitted that the absurd proposal was by far the most exciting game he had ever been invited to play. The High Temple constantly hounding him to produce an heir and cement his lineage, the timing of her proposal couldn't have been more perfect. From the Temple's perspective, Rebecca's status as a divorcee wouldn't be an obstacle, given the liberal marriage laws of the decree of faith. However, cases of noblemen openly parading concubines and taking second wives, just as the vile Count Zeppelin had done, were a shameful rarity. Carlyle's eyes darkened with raw fury as he thought of the Count's continuous public humiliation and torment of his young, childless wife. He clenched his fist in disgust, fiercely declaring that a pathetic, abusive coward like Zeppelin deserved nothing less than a humiliating divorce. From the shadows of the estate garden, Leo's sharp eyes had witnessed the terrifying reality of the Count's cruelty, watching him physically abuse his staff. Carlyle knew in his heart that Rebecca had endured unspeakable horrors, remembering how incredibly fragile and light she had felt in his arms. He resolved that if she became his duchess, he would protect her from the shadows and grant her the absolute power she needed to destroy her enemies. Back in the grand estate, sunlight began to filter through the windows, marking the arrival of a fateful morning filled with hidden plots. In the washroom, a pair of tense hands splashed cold water onto a weary face, washing away the remnants of a sleepless, scheming night. Wiping the water from his neck, the Count dried himself off, completely unaware of the absolute chaos about to disrupt the quiet of the morning. Suddenly, a blood-curdling, furious shriek echoed violently through the stone corridors of the Devonshire estate, shattering the peace. Terrified guards burst through the heavy double doors of the Count's chambers, swords drawn as they frantically demanded to know what had happened. Inside, a disheveled and purple-faced Count Zeppelin screamed in sheer, unadulterated horror as he stared at his head in the mirror. The guards desperately tried to suppress their laughter, struggling to keep straight faces at the sight of the Count's violently hacked, completely ruined hair. The raging cries of Count Zeppelin echoed violently through the corridors, his fury shaking the very foundation of the estate as he demanded the heads of the guards who had failed him. From her quiet chambers, Rebecca listened to the chaos, her lips curling into a knowing smirk as the sweet melody of his ruin began to play out. Turning away from the bedroom doors, Rebecca cast her gaze toward her dressing table, her eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction at the successful execution of her opening move. She slowly reached out and clicked open a pristine, velvet-lined red box, revealing the chaotic mess of golden strands coiled inside. Staring down at the severed lock of Zeppelin's hair, Rebecca let out a low, amused chuckle, silently marveling at the sheer capability of the maid who had delivered exactly what she requested. The soft creak of the door breaking the silence drew her gaze back toward the entrance as a familiar figure quietly slipped into the room. It was Kana, carrying a basin of fresh water, her expression calm and collected as she softly inquired if her mistress had slept well. Rebecca praised the maid's swift and flawless execution, while Kana humbly dismissed the compliment, insisting that retrieving the hair had been a simple matter. Looking up from her thoughts, Rebecca quietly instructed Kana to prepare an outfit, stating her intention to slip away from the estate for a secret outing. With a devious, glittering smile, she ordered Kana to select the shabbiest, most ordinary clothes in her wardrobe to ensure she would blend seamlessly into the slums. Later that morning, a heavy, suffocating silence hung over the grand dining hall as the Count sat with his wife and his pregnant mistress, the clattering of utensils the only sound in the tense air. Zeppelin aggressively sliced through his steak, his face still dark with lingering humiliation over his ruined hair as he chewed in bitter silence. Seeking attention, Alicia put on her best delicate facade, pushing her empty bowl forward and asking the maid for another serving of soup. But Zeppelin's cold, critical gaze immediately snapped to her, harshly ordering her to stop eating and cruelly pointing out that she had gained weight. Alicia gasped in shock, trying to defend herself by mentioning her pregnancy, only for the sadistic Count to mockingly sneer that commoners simply lacked the restraint of true nobility. He ruthlessly compared her to Rebecca, gesturing toward his wife and commanding his pregnant mistress to learn some elegance from the Duchess. Rebecca gracefully patted her lips with a silk handkerchief, adopting a perfectly crafted mask of gentle concern as she softly urged him not to be so harsh. With calculated tenderness, Rebecca reached across the table, gently resting her hand over Zeppelin's as she pleaded on behalf of the tearful woman. Feigning deep sorrow, Rebecca looked down and whispered that she felt eternally guilty for failing to provide him an heir, so the least she could do was support the woman who could. She claimed she only wanted Alicia's child to grow up strong and healthy, masterfully playing on Zeppelin's immense ego and pride. Swayed entirely by Rebecca's fake devotion, Zeppelin's frustration melted away, and he carelessly gestured to the maid to bring his mistress another half-plate of food. But the patronizing pity was too much for Alicia to bear. Throwing her utensils down in a fit of rage, she screamed that she would rather starve than accept Rebecca's charity. Zeppelin slammed his fist onto the table, roaring in fury at his mistress's ungrateful outburst as she dared to reject his command. Rebecca quickly stood and held Zeppelin back, whispering sweet, placating lies about how pregnancy simply made women emotional and sensitive. Then, smoothly shifting the focus of the conversation, Rebecca gestured toward his unevenly hacked head, suggesting that he should cut his hair short to fix the damage. With a sweet, flattering smile, she coaxed him, whispering that a shorter cut would make him look incredibly handsome and far more masculine. Flushed with vanity and completely blinded by her false affection, Zeppelin touched his head, sheepishly agreeing to her suggestion. In that instant, Rebecca's warm smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating gleam as she realized he had fallen perfectly into her trap. Seizing the moment of his good mood, she casually requested his permission to go out for a brief stroll today. Zeppelin paused, lowering his glass as his suspicious nature flared, his cold blue eyes narrowing as he demanded to know where she was going. The tension in the dining hall spiked as he stared her down, demanding absolute clarity about her sudden desire to leave the estate. Calmly meeting his gaze, Rebecca claimed she was simply heading to the Liberta charity house to resume her regular volunteer work after a long absence. Zeppelin skeptically looked her up and down, questioning why a high-born lady would choose to wear such cheap, drab clothing for a simple trip. Rebecca smoothly explained that dressing elegantly would only draw the wrong kind of attention in the slums, prompting Zeppelin to smugly agree that looking like a beggar was indeed safer. Rebecca gently touched his arm in fake gratitude, completely ignoring the venomous, burning glare Alicia shot at her from across the table. Gripping her dress in a silent fury, Alicia trembled with raw hatred, cursing the Duchess as a manipulative, fox-like wench who was clearly plotting something. Meanwhile, in the luxurious Duke's estate, Carlyle sat on his bed, strictly reminding his aide that he had specifically requested the plainest attire possible for his secret meeting. His red-haired advisor, Croa, held up a dark, elegant robe, arguing that they still had to maintain the Duke's honorable reputation despite the unusual request. Without looking up from his book, Carlyle sharply warned Croa to watch his tongue, reminding him that the woman they were meeting would soon be the Duchess. Croa sighed in exasperation, muttering that if Carlyle was going to dress like a commoner, he should at least make an effort to tidy his messy hair. Carlyle merely stood up and brushed past his advisor, completely ignoring the critique as he prepared to depart. Staring after him, Croa skeptically raised an eyebrow, demanding to know if this mysterious countess was truly so captivating that she had captured his master's attention. Carlyle paused, running a hand through his dark hair as a thoughtful expression crossed his handsome face. He smiled to himself, musing that she was certainly intriguing, especially considering the rather large age gap between them. Croa erupted in dramatic panic, loudly declaring that he was merely a loyal retainer deeply worried about his dangerously naive duke falling for a suspicious woman. But Carlyle's playful demeanor instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, resolute look as he folded his arms and stated that a contract marriage with her was his best option. He looked Croa directly in the eyes, his voice dropping to a serious whisper as he declared he would do absolutely anything to break his damned curse. Croa grimaced, quietly asking what they would do if the Countess's promises turned out to be nothing but an elaborate lie. Carlyle's eyes gleamed with a dangerous, fatalistic light as he calmly replied that he was perfectly willing to let himself be deceived. Staring at his reflection in the mirror, the Duke admitted that while he didn't trust her completely, she was the only one who held the key to his salvation. With a confident, sharp smirk, Carlyle turned away, declaring that there was no need to worry because, after all, he was the powerful Duke Johannes Carlyle, and he would control this game until the very end. Carlyle's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and demanding. He needed absolute assurance that while he was caught in this web of deception, his loyal advisor would not rest until a cure for his curse was found. Croa stared at the Duke, his mind immediately drifting back to the very first day they had met. Even as a mere child, Carlyle had never carried the innocence of youth. He bore the heavy, silent gravity of a man who had already faced death. Yet, behind that stoic, unreadable facade, Croa had seen the truth. To him, the young lord had looked like a fragile shard of glass, desperately holding himself together under a torrent of silent agony, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Standing together in the freezing, relentless rain, a fragile bond had been forged between them. The young Duke had declared Croa his one and only ally, a lifeline in a world of absolute treachery. On that fateful day, as their hands locked in a firm, silent pact, Croa had sworn a lifetime of unwavering loyalty. He resolved that no matter the cost, he would stand by the Duke's side until the very end. Surrounded by towering stacks of ancient, dusty research, Croa pored over every text he could find, fueled by a single desperate desire. He had to break the curse to protect the boy who had lost his entire family and had never even been allowed to cry. But as he stared into the dark, an unsettling question gnawed at his soul. How could a total stranger like the Countess know the deepest, most guarded secrets of the curse? Secrets that even he, after years of tireless research, had never managed to uncover. The heavy tension broke into a sudden, chaotic banter as Croa insisted on tagging along to the secret meeting, claiming the Duke desperately needed his brilliant intellect. Carlyle merely sighed in sheer exasperation, finding his advisor's overprotective nagging more irritating than usual. Fastening his dark travel cloak, Croa's expression hardened into one of intense resolve. Despite the banter, his heart was heavy with genuine dread, fearing the mysterious Rebecca might be leading them into a deadly trap. If she was playing a dangerous game, he would be there to unmask her. He had to discover her true, hidden intentions before it was too late to save his master. Meanwhile, under the warm, bright morning sun, the Libertad charity house was alive with the cheerful laughter of innocent children playing. It was a rare haven of peace, seemingly untouched by the dark conspiracies swirling in the high society estates. Stepping into the courtyard, Rebecca offered a gentle, radiant smile to those gathered, her elegant posture masking the storm of strategic thoughts brewing beneath her calm exterior. The local women eagerly rushed to greet her, clasping her hands with tearful gratitude and praising her endless generosity for keeping their sanctuary alive. But as the pleasantries continued, a trusted worker leaned in close, her hushed whisper instantly shattering the warm atmosphere with a chilling message. Their highly anticipated guest had already arrived and was waiting inside. Rebecca's eyes sharpened as she turned toward the building, her mind racing. The pieces of her grand plan were finally falling into place, but one wrong step would spell absolute ruin. Slipping through the shadows of the garden, a dark hooded figure watched her every move with predatory focus. It was Robert, the Count's ruthless spy, who had been shadowing her movements for months under Zeppelin's strict orders. Detecting the spy's presence with practiced ease, Rebecca let out a soft, calculated cough, subtly giving the prearranged signal to her loyal maid. Instantly springing into action, Kana approached the cloaked spy with a bright, overly cheerful smile, completely throwing him off guard with her sudden and flawless distraction. With masterful ease, the maid guided the confused and frustrated spy away from the courtyard, successfully clearing the path for her mistress's secret meeting. As she walked toward the inner chambers, Rebecca's mind filled with cold skepticism. Zeppelin's spy was letting himself be led away far too easily. She had to wonder what game the Count was truly playing. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors of the private meeting room, Rebecca stepped inside, offering a polite, practiced apology for keeping her guests waiting. But the moment her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she froze in absolute shock, her breath catching in her throat at the sight of the two figures waiting for her. Standing before her were Carlyle and his trusted advisor. Rebecca's gaze locked onto the red-haired man, a sudden wave of staggering realization washing over her. It was Croa. Her mind instantly flashed back to her previous life, remembering how the Libertat charity house had been her sole sanctuary of peace when she fled the horrific, suffocating abuse of Count Zeppelin. And it was in this very house, during those dark, desperate days of her past life, that she had first crossed paths with a mysterious, ragged vagabond. At the time, Croa had been completely disheveled and wild-eyed, raving about being the Duke's former butler to anyone who would listen, though the locals dismissed him as nothing but a madman. But Rebecca had listened. She had been the only one who realized that beneath his apparent madness lay secrets that only a high-ranking, personal aide of the Duke could possibly possess. In that Julian had been bedridden, slowly dying from the family curse, while a desperate Croa had slowly lost his mind, wandering the lands in a hopeless search for a cure. During his feverish, unstable episodes, the broken butler had inadvertently whispered the deepest, most heavily guarded secrets of the ducal house to Rebecca. In his dying breaths, Croa had wept bitterly for his young master's tragic fate, coughing up dark, thick blood as he desperately swore to find a way to break the curse. Near death and burning with a lethal fever, he had reached out to her, whispering his final, ground-shattering discovery. He had finally found the secret to saving the Johannes family. His voice had faded into a weak, raspy thread as he prepared to utter the forbidden truth that could change everything. Gripping her clothes with a terrifying, desperate strength, he had gasped out the final, crucial secret before his hand went limp, leaving Rebecca with a knowledge too heavy to bear. Back then, fleeing for her life from Zeppelin's reach, she had been powerless to act upon his words or warn the ducal house of their salvation. But now, reborn with a second chance, she was prepared to use his dying words to rewrite history. She silently begged for his forgiveness, knowing this was the only way she could secure her own survival. The silence in the room was suddenly broken by Carlyle's deep, suspicious voice, demanding to know if the two of them had met before. Croa erupted in a frantic, sweating panic, waving his hands wildly as he swore to heaven that he had never seen the Countess before in his life. Rebecca quickly intervened with a smooth, disarming smile, claiming it was merely a misunderstanding and that she simply found Croce's loyal demeanor to be highly commendable. Stepping over to the elegant seating area, she gestured for them to sit, her voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone as she suggested they get straight to the heart of the matter. With absolute composure, she brought out the documents, ready to finalize the terms of their proposed marriage contract. The contract laid out the chilling, high-stakes clauses. The Duke must invest in her plan to destroy the Devonshire family. Both parties were free to pursue discreet romantic endeavors, and the contract would end only with the death of Count Zeppelin, at which point Rebecca would break the Johannes curse. Carlyle quietly reviewed the parchment, his sharp eyes scanning the terms before he looked up, stating he had one final crucial question. His gaze locked onto hers, demanding to know why she was not content with a simple divorce. Why did she harbor such a deep, murderous desire to completely destroy the Devonshire county and end Zeppelin's life? Rebecca's eyes grew cold and distant as she gripped her skirt in a silent, trembling fury, quietly replying that she would reveal her reasons only when the time was right. Carlyle watched her closely, searching for any sign of deceit, but he could detect no hidden, malicious motives in her intense, painful gaze. Rebecca leaned forward, assuring him that no harm would come to him and that he would not have to dirty his hands. She would handle all the dark, bloody work herself. All she required from him was the formidable protection of the Duchess's title and the vast financial backing of his house. She looked him directly in the eyes, swearing with absolute conviction that whatever wealth he lent her, she would return to him twofold once her revenge was complete. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto Carlyle's handsome face. He questioned his own sanity, marveling at the fact that he actually believed her seemingly absurd, impossible promises. Standing up, the Duke stared down at her with a challenging smirk, agreeing to the terms because he had nothing to lose. But his voice dropped to a low, thrilling whisper as he announced there was still one clause he intended to amend. Carlyle's finger slammed down onto the parchment, pinpointing the single clause that threatened his absolute control. He would not bind himself to a contract that left any room for secret betrayal. Leaning forward with a dark, mocking intensity, the Duke made his stance chillingly clear. If they were to play the part of husband and wife, he demanded absolute veto power over her every romantic move. Rebecca maintained her flawless composure, though internally her mind raced. She had only written that loophole to protect Carlyle's own heart, but it seemed the cold Duke was far more possessive than she had anticipated. Offering a sharp, confident smile, Rebecca raised her quill. If a simple clause made the powerful Duke feel this insecure, she had no issue rewriting the terms of their fate on the spot. Carlyle watched her write, his gaze darkening as his own unspoken vows echoed in his mind. This was a fake marriage, yet he swore to himself that he would never descend to the same vile, unfaithful acts that had ruined his father's legacy. With a smooth slide of her hand, the newly amended document glided across the polished wood, sealed with terms that bound them tighter than ever before. Carlyle picked up the contract, his sharp eyes scanning the fresh ink as a grim sense of satisfaction settled over him. Finally, the trap was set. Without a word of warning, the Duke suddenly pushed himself up from his seat, leaving Rebecca startled by his sudden shift in gravity. A sudden, brilliant spark ignited the air as Carlyle held the heavy parchment directly over the flickering candle flame, letting the fire greedily consume their written agreement. Rebecca gasped in absolute shock, her blue eyes widening as she watched her carefully crafted leverage dissolve into ash right before her eyes. With a cold, calculated breath, Carlyle blew the remaining black ash from his fingertips. In their dangerous world of whispers, written evidence was nothing but a death warrant waiting to be found. Standing tall, the Duke stared down at her with a chilling resolve. He would protect their secret alliance with his very life, but only if she understood that betrayal would cost her everything. His eyes burned with a dangerous golden intensity as he leaned closer, demanding to know if she truly had the courage to remain loyal to the end. Pressing her hand firmly over her heart, Rebecca met his gaze with absolute defiance, swearing on her life that she would stand by him until their enemies were completely destroyed. The tension broke as Carlyle paced the room, immediately steering their alliance toward their first target. Count Devonshire was a colossal beast of power, and defeating him would require a masterpiece of sabotage. Rebecca casually raised her teacup, her voice dropping to a cool, clinical whisper. To bring down a titan like Devonshire, one had to target the very foundation holding him upright: his people. She knew the Count's empire rested on 4 vital pillars: the estate staff, his wealthy vassals, his web of informants, and his formidable order of knights. But these were no ordinary loyalists. They were the hounds, ruthless, lethal tools trained to tear apart anyone who dared threaten the Devonshire name. Driven not by devotion, but by sheer terror, these elite agents were bound to the Count by their darkest, most humiliating secrets. Carlyle's expression hardened as he analyzed the threat. Taming a pack of rabid hounds that feared their master more than death itself seemed like an impossible feat. A cold, predatory smile played on Rebecca's lips as she envisioned the chaos to come. She didn't want to tame them. She planned to shatter their chains and watch them tear their former master to shreds. Intrigued by her ruthless brilliance, Carlyle rested his chin on his hand, eager to know what part he had to play in this grand execution. Pouring another cup of tea, Rebecca revealed the first phase of her plan. She would establish a shadow merchant guild, but she needed a genius to run it from the dark. Carlyle agreed instantly, though a crucial question remained. Trapped within her estate, she had no freedom to move. How could she possibly direct a rebellion from a gilded cage? Dropping heavily back into his seat, the Duke let out a rare, amused chuckle. It seemed his role in this dangerous game was delightfully simple: finance her war and watch the empire burn. With boundless wealth at his disposal, Carlyle leaned back, giving her unlimited access to the deep vaults of the ducal house. Rebecca bowed her head in gratitude, but before the Duke could celebrate their deal, her eyes gleamed with a sudden, calculating request for one final, crucial element. She needed the Devil's Claw, a highly toxic, forbidden plant that was as rare as it was deadly, historically traded for exorbitant fortunes. Carlyle stared at her in disbelief, warning her that procuring such a lethal poison was a nearly impossible task unless she planned to grow it herself. With a radiant, almost mocking smile, Rebecca leaned in, playfully whispering that she wanted to hurry their wedding along, and this poison was the fastest ticket to her freedom. But behind her playful facade lay a world-altering secret from her past life. The deadly Devil's Claw possessed a hidden, miraculous property that only a genius botanist could unlock. It was the ultimate cure. If ingested in its raw form, the leaf would trigger a violent, blistering fever, but it would completely purge every single drop of dark toxin from the human body. In her tragic past, the obsessed Count Zeppelin had forced her to consume the agonizing plant in his desperate, vain pursuit of eternal youth, completely unaware of its true healing potential. Rebecca's gaze drifted as she explained the dark reality of her marriage. Zeppelin's obsession with her was built entirely on a single, fragile foundation. He was enamored only with her flawless, youthful beauty. The moment that beauty withered and decayed, his fake love would transform into utter disgust, prompting him to discard her. Carlyle felt a sudden, heavy ache in his chest as he stared at her, horrified by the absolute calm in her voice as she discussed destroying her own beauty to escape her tormentor. Sensing his pity, Rebecca dismissed his concern with a soft laugh. In a world of predators, everyone carried a hidden scar just to survive. The Duke watched her silently, a sudden, powerful urge blooming in his chest. He didn't just want her cure anymore. He wanted to understand the complicated woman behind the mask. Reaching out his hand, Carlyle sealed their pact once and for all. They were no longer just conspirators. They were partners bound to change history. Their hands locked in a firm, unbreakable grip, surrounded by a fleeting moment of peace as their fates became irreversibly intertwined. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, bloody shadows across the stone courtyard, the carriage arrived at the massive Devonshire estate. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, Rebecca stepped back into the lion's den, instantly greeted by a cold, familiar voice waiting in the dim light. Her breath caught in her throat as Count Zeppelin slowly turned around, showing off a striking new haircut that instantly set off alarm bells in her head. Forcing her heart to slow down, Rebecca quickly donned her perfect submissive mask, praising his new look with practiced, empty flattery. Zeppelin stepped close, his cold fingers trailing down her golden hair with a possessive, unsettling touch that made her skin crawl. Pulling her tight against his chest, the Count whispered in her ear, his voice dripping with a dangerous fondness as he lamented neglecting her for his new favorite mistress. He gently twirled her golden locks between his fingers, his sudden, suffocating affection masking a deeply sinister undertone. The heavy silence of the room grew suffocating as he held her in a tight, inescapable embrace, his mind clearly plotting his next move. Looking deeply into her eyes, he softly announced that they would be spending the entire day locked away together, far from any prying eyes. Rebecca's stomach violently churned with absolute dread as she fought to keep her panic from showing. Her time was running out, and one wrong move would destroy everything. As she lay trapped in Zeppelin's suffocating embrace, Rebecca felt as though a swarm of venomous insects was slowly devouring her from the inside out. His sickeningly sweet voice sliced through the dark room, demanding she strip away her travel-worn clothes, make herself beautiful, and present herself to his chambers. Back in her private room, Rebecca stared coldly into the distance, wearing her elaborate gown with the perfect, chilling composure of a woman preparing for war. In the reflection of the glass, she beheld a breathtaking, ethereal beauty, a perfect masterpiece crafted solely to satisfy the dangerous, shallow desires of a monster. Shaking off her momentary disgust, Rebecca abruptly turned away, determined to use this very beauty as the ultimate weapon to destroy her enemies. With a heavy, ominous groan, the grand wooden doors swung open, welcoming her to a battlefield disguised as a lavish mansion hall. Stepping out onto the cold stone landing, she repeated a silent, steadying mantra to herself. Everything was going to be fine. Her fingers clenched tightly into the delicate fabric of her gown as she took a deep breath, steeling her resolve for the trap she was about to spring. Suddenly, a sharp, patronizing voice cut through the silence as Alicia appeared on the stairs, blocking her path with a smug, mocking smile. Alicia walked down with a false air of superiority, mockingly praising Rebecca's beauty while secretly plotting her utter ruin. Rebecca paid her no mind, taking slow, deliberate steps up the grand staircase as her mind calculated the perfect timing for her counterstrike. Alicia sneered, reminding Rebecca that her youthful allure was fleeting, confidently boasting that she would soon steal the Count's undivided devotion. A chilling, piercing blue light flashed in Rebecca's eyes as she absorbed the insult, a deadly calm washing over her soul. Standing tall, Rebecca looked down at her rival, coldly telling her that she was welcome to have the beast's wretched attention. She swept past Alicia with effortless grace, letting the heavy tension between them coil tighter and tighter. Leaning in close, Rebecca whispered a devastating truth that struck Alicia like a physical blow. She would never be the true wife, and any child she bore would forever remain second best. Alicia's face twisted into a mask of pure rage as her fingers dug desperately into her dress, her pride completely shattered. Unable to contain her burning fury, Alicia let out a frantic, high-pitched scream of warning. Down below, the servants gasped in sheer terror, instantly drawn toward the chaotic noise echoing from the grand stairwell. A wicked, desperate grin flashed on Alicia's face as she threw her foot forward, deliberately stepping onto Rebecca's trailing gown to drag them both down. The world went entirely topsy-turvy as Alicia's weight shifted, gravity greedily claiming her body as she fell backward over the railing. In that split second of freefall, a dark, victorious smile played on Rebecca's lips. This was exactly what she had anticipated. With a violent, bone-shattering force, both women tumbled down the grand spiral of the stairs in a chaotic tangle of white silk. A thunderous, sickening crash echoed through the mansion, bringing a sudden, terrifying end to the descent. Both bodies lay completely motionless at the foot of the stairs, surrounded by an eerie, breathless silence. Rebecca slowly dragged herself over Alicia's trembling form, her blood-splattered face leaning close to whisper a chilling warning. Staring directly into Alicia's terrified violet eyes, Rebecca whispered that the secret child growing in her belly was the only asset she had left, leaving her rival utterly paralyzed with dread. The double doors burst open as the panicked maids rushed into the hall, screaming in absolute horror at the bloody sight. Clutching her head in agonizing pain, Rebecca let out a low, weak groan, perfectly playing the part of the fragile victim. Footsteps echoed sharply from the upper floor as Count Zeppelin arrived, demanding to know the source of the chaotic commotion. Rebecca looked up with wide, tear-filled eyes, letting him see the brutal cuts and fresh blood running down her pale cheek. Gasping in horror, Zeppelin flew down the remaining steps, dropping to his knees as he beheld the ruined face of his prized obsession. Cupping her face with trembling hands, his voice shook with a lethal rage as he threatened to execute anyone responsible for a single scratch on her skin. Forcing a weak, saintly tone, Rebecca pleaded with him to forgive Alicia, claiming her sister had done absolutely nothing wrong. Before he could answer, her eyes rolled back and her head went limp, plunging the Count into a state of sheer panic as she fainted. The loyal maid screamed for a doctor immediately, urging the panicked Count to carry his unconscious bride to her chambers. Without a second thought, Zeppelin lifted her battered body, rushing away as his protective fury reached a dangerous boiling point. Slowly turning his head, the Count's eyes locked onto Alicia, his gaze dripping with a murderous, unforgiving coldness. He hissed her name with chilling venom, demanding to know how a mere mistress dared to forget her place in his house. Alicia fell to her knees, trembling violently as she sobbed, desperately lying that the entire incident had been a terrible accident. Turning his back on her pleas, Zeppelin raised his hand, coldly ordering his guards to drag Alicia away to the dark, isolated Hall of Light. The next morning, bright sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, bringing a false sense of peace to the blood-stained estate. As the maid carefully wrapped clean white bandages around her arm, she softly questioned if Rebecca truly had to push her body to such violent extremes. A brilliant, tranquil smile graced Rebecca's bandaged face as she replied that a few scars were a laughably cheap price to pay for what she was about to gain. By sacrificing her physical beauty, she had successfully bought herself 2 whole months of absolute freedom from Zeppelin's touch, thanks to a crucial memory from her past life. In her tragic previous existence, Alicia had fallen down those very stairs, and Rebecca, blinded by petty jealousy, had foolishly framed her for it. Knowing Alicia's predictable, malicious nature, Rebecca knew her rival would attempt the exact same scheme in this life, and she had gladly let her do it. She leaned forward, asking about Alicia's fate, only to learn that Zeppelin had unleashed his ruthless hounds to keep her under absolute surveillance. A spark of dark satisfaction ignited in her blue eyes as she realized her plan had worked perfectly, leaving only one final piece of the puzzle to assemble. With a knowing smile, the maid confirmed that the mysterious guest Rebecca had secretly summoned was scheduled to arrive this very afternoon. Even in her pain, Rebecca's mind remains dangerously sharp as she questions her maid about Count Zeppelin's reaction to her tragic fall. The response is unsettling. Zeppelin is surprisingly supportive, expressing deep concern for her fragile mental state, a chilling kindness that only masks his true obsessive nature. She knows Zeppelin's sudden concern is entirely out of character, a calculated anomaly she must decode quickly before he changes his mind. But her thoughts are violently shattered when the heavy doors of her chamber fly open, revealing a frantic, unexpected arrival. Standing in the doorway is Rebecca's mother, her face pale with terror as she desperately demands to know what horror has befallen her eldest daughter in this house of secrets. Despite her mother's frantic breathing, Rebecca remains a picture of chilling composure, greeting her with a cold, knowing smile that completely hides her inner turmoil. When pressed about Alicia's betrayal, Rebecca spins a flawless, selfless web of lies, claiming she was merely trying to save her falling rival, a brilliant deception designed to paint herself as the ultimate saint. Whoops, I think I read that last part wrong. Do you want me to try again or just continue? Her mother falls completely for the act, sighing in deep anguish over Rebecca's supposed naivety and kindness, entirely unaware of the deadly game her daughter is actually playing. Beneath her gentle facade, a bitter resentment flares in Rebecca's chest as she remembers a painful truth. For all her mother's loud worries now, she had never reached out to her even once during her worst torment. Her fingers tighten against her gown, a silent storm of anger brewing within her. She understands they were powerless against the Count's influence, but understanding does nothing to cure her deep-seated resentment. Memories of a dark night resurface, recalling the moment she uncovered the damning financial documents in her father's study, a literal transaction showing her family sold her to Zeppelin like a piece of prized cattle. Even before the wedding, the warning signs were there, whispered quietly into her ear as her mother prepared her for a lifetime of golden captivity. Her mother had begged her never to bear Zeppelin's heir, warning that a child would forever bind her to his madness, proving that her family knew exactly what kind of monster they were selling her to. Back in the present, the heavy weight of their shared history hangs in the air, her mother's eyes searching her daughter's scarred face with a sudden, suffocating guilt. A vision of Zeppelin's arrogant past returns when he coldly demanded her hand in marriage, ignoring her family's initial protests because he knew his absolute authority would eventually break them. The trap had been perfectly laid. When her father's massive investments collapsed and drove the family to the absolute brink of ruin, Zeppelin appeared like a predatory savior with a chest full of blood money. With a cruel, victorious smirk, the Count had cornered her desperate parents, leaving them with no choice but to surrender their eldest daughter to his whims. Left with absolutely no leverage and a family to save, her parents had bowed their heads in silent defeat, sacrificing Rebecca to preserve their own survival. They had signed the contract, comforting themselves with the lie that Rebecca was fond of the Count, but her mother is now forced to face the brutal reality of her self-deception. In a sudden, desperate burst of emotion, her mother begs her to abandon their noble status, suggesting they flee the high society nightmare to live a simple, quiet life of obscurity. Rebecca listens to the frantic proposal with an icy, unreadable expression, her mind completely untouched by her mother's desperate fantasy of escape. She delivers a sharp dose of reality, reminding her mother of the devastating consequences a sudden flight would bring upon her father and younger siblings under the Count's wrath. The harsh truth of Rebecca's words strikes her mother like a physical blow, silencing her desperate pleas as she realizes the trap they are in has no simple escape. For a fleeting second, the memory of her innocent childhood flashes before her eyes, a time when she ran freely under the warm sun, completely unaware of the dark destiny waiting for her. A single heavy tear slips from her mother's eye, a painful acknowledgement of the innocence they can never reclaim and the daughter they ruined. Overwhelmed by the crushing weight of her past, Rebecca lets her perfect mask slip for just a moment, burying her face in her hands as her loyal maid steps forward to offer comfort. The brief moment of vulnerability is instantly shattered as her mother notices the maid standing in the shadows, her panic flaring at the thought of a potential spy listening in. Rebecca quickly calms her mother's rising panic, revealing that Kana is no ordinary maid, but a trusted ally who belongs entirely to her inner circle. With her ally by her side, Rebecca lays out her true ambition. She will build an unbreakable foundation and walk away from this hell on her own terms, inviting her mother to escape the Devonshire shadow with her. She delivers her master plan with chilling, unshakable certainty, a declaration of war disguised as a simple, impossible promise. Her mother gasps in sheer disbelief, her mind struggling to comprehend how a mere viscount's daughter could ever divorce a powerful, obsessive count without being destroyed. The shock deepens into pure bewilderment as Rebecca calmly announces her intention to remarry the legendary Duke Carlisle Johannes, a move so bold it borders on madness. She warns her mother that this deadly secret must remain strictly between them, for if her father catches wind of it, the entire plan will collapse before it even begins. Looking into her daughter's fiercely determined eyes, her mother recognizes a chilling truth. When Rebecca wears this expression, there is absolutely nothing in this world that can stop her. Consumed by a newfound hope, her mother surrenders to her daughter's leadership, eagerly asking what role she must play to bring down their common oppressor. A wicked, victorious smile spreads across Rebecca's face as she proposes a brilliant new venture, the first true step towards securing their absolute financial independence. As the silver moonlight bathes her chamber, Rebecca stares out into the dark night, the quiet stillness of the room hiding the storm she is about to unleash. Her quiet reflection is interrupted as Kana slips back into the room, her voice soft but filled with concern for her mistress's physical confinement. Rebecca admits to the stifling weight of her artificial confinement, her vibrant spirit chafing under the very trap she willingly set for herself. She laments her temporary inability to move freely, fully aware that the Count's guards would never allow his injured prize to step beyond these gilded walls. A sudden, mischievous spark ignites in the maid's eyes as she steps closer, offering an unexpected solution to her mistress's plight. Before Rebecca can even react, Kenna sweeps her off her feet with effortless, surprising strength, catching the noblewoman completely off guard. Stunned by her maid's audacity, Rebecca can only stare in speechless wonder as she finds herself cradled securely in Kana's powerful arms. Whispering reassurances of their safety, Kana explains that the Count's deadly patrol dogs have cleared the area, leaving them a perfect temporary window of absolute privacy. With a breathtaking leap, the maid dives out into the cool night air, executing a silent, daring escape right under the noses of their oppressors. Landing with the grace of a feline on the cold stone courtyard, they slip past the outer defenses, a thrilling taste of forbidden freedom coursing through Rebecca's veins. Gazing down at her mistress with unwavering loyalty, Kana softly asks where she wishes to go, promising to be her strong, tireless legs for the night. A rare, genuine warmth softens Rebecca's eyes as she looks at her companion, realizing that she is no longer fighting this terrifying war entirely alone. Pointing toward a distant, fragrant sanctuary, Rebecca directs her loyal guardian toward the hidden lilac garden, a place of peace amidst the chaos. Enveloped by the sweet, intoxicating scent of blooming lilacs, the two women step into a moonlit paradise, momentarily escaping the suffocating dread of the Devonshire estate. Breaking the comfortable silence, Rebecca softly questions why Kana has remained so quiet, asking no questions about the dangerous plans she overheard. She looks deep into Kana's eyes, prompting her to address the treasonous secrets of divorce and remarriage they discussed. Secrets that could easily cost them both their lives if whispered to the wrong ears. The quiet of the lilac garden is shattered by the weight of Kana's words, her voice laced with a fierce, absolute devotion that catches Rebecca completely off guard. Under the cool moonlight, Kana whispers her solemn vow, promising to follow Rebecca even into the very depths of hell if that is what it takes to secure her freedom. Rebecca can only look at her in stunned silence, the icy walls around her heart cracking slightly as she processes the sheer magnitude of Kana's unconditional trust. With swift, silent steps, Kana carries her mistress deeper into the fragrant shadows of the garden, a quiet sanctuary that is about to become the stage for an unexpected confrontation. Spotting a stone bench nestled among the blooming lilacs, Kana softly suggests they pause for a moment of rest, oblivious to the eyes waiting for them in the dark. As Kana gently lowers Rebecca onto the cold stone, the relative peace of the night is instantly shattered by a subtle shift in the air, a silent warning that they are no longer alone. Kana's eyes snap open with lethal sharpness, her body instantly tense as her honed senses register a foreign presence lurking in the immediate shadows. Hissing a low warning to her mistress, Kana stands guard as a tall, cloaked figure slowly materializes from the darkness, stepping into the dim moonlight. The man offers a deceptively polite greeting, his deep voice carrying a chilling familiarity that makes Rebecca's blood run cold. Recognition strikes Rebecca like a physical blow. The man standing before her is none other than Robert Crowley, one of the Count's most relentless hounds. Keeping her composure, Rebecca demands to know what business a hound of Devonshire has invading her private sanctuary at such an hour, her voice sharp as glass. She flatly accuses him of eavesdropping on their secret conversation, but Crowley merely chuckles, offering a hollow excuse about enjoying the beautiful moon. Rebecca observes him with a cold, knowing smirk, mocking his supposed loyalty for working so diligently at such an ungodly hour to keep her caged. Refusing to play his games, she delivers a chilling reality check, reminding him that she is far from the fragile, clueless bird he thinks she is. Crowley's polite smile falters, replaced by a grim seriousness as he realizes Rebecca is acutely aware of the invisible eyes monitoring her every breath. Instead of retreating, Rebecca disarms him completely by stating she has no intention of blaming him, acknowledging that he is merely a servant playing his assigned role in a larger game. With a sudden, enchanting smile, she invites him to sit and admire the moon with her, revealing that she has been waiting for the perfect opportunity to speak with him alone. Crowley flinches, quietly begging her to refer to him simply as Robert, a strange request that immediately piques Rebecca's dark curiosity about his true identity. Rebecca lets out a soft, mocking sigh, musing aloud on the cruel, suffocating nature of blood ties that force a man to sacrifice his own soul. Her words cut like a scalpel as she exposes his deepest pain, his secret loathing for his own family name, and the tragic reality of becoming a ruthless hound just to keep them alive. Terrified by how easily she read his soul, Robert demands to know the extent of her knowledge, his defensive walls crumbling in an instant. She calmly drops the first hammer of truth, revealing she knows he is actually a descendant of the highly prestigious and secretive House of Kadirgo. Rebecca leans forward, whispering the ultimate leverage. She knows his entire family is trapped in Zeppelin's merciless clutches, but she has one final, shocking revelation to offer. With a victorious, dangerous smile, she looks him dead in the eye and promises that she is the only one in this world who can actually save them. Memories of her tragic past life flood her mind, reminding her of the grim fate Robert suffered when Zeppelin brutally murdered him under the false suspicion of loving her. She vividly recalls the heavy sorrow of his funeral, where his grieving family emerged from the shadows to mourn their lost son. It was on that dark day she saw the forbidden mark of the owl upon their foreheads, proving beyond a doubt that the Crowleys were devout followers of the outlawed Kadirgo faith. Staring at Robert in the present, she finally decodes the mystery of the jagged scar across his brow, a brutal, self-inflicted wound meant to conceal his heretical tattoo. She remembers her father's childhood warnings about the brutal persecution of the Kadirgo people under the ruling Defria faith, forcing them to mutilate themselves to survive. Back in the moonlit garden, Robert scoffs in bitter disbelief, a mocking smirk playing on his lips, at the absurd notion of a prisoner offering salvation. He steps closer, demanding to know how a fragile, heavily bandaged noblewoman expects to pull off a miracle that seems entirely impossible. Before he can take another step, Kana thrusts herself between them, her eyes flashing with a lethal warning to back away before she tears him apart. Rebecca gently eases her maid's rising fury, requesting instead that Kana hand her a pen and a small scrap of paper to seal her bargain. With calm composure, Rebecca scribbles a few lines and extends the folded note to the stunned hound, challenging him to take his destiny into his own hands. Robert stares at the paper in his hand, his analytical mind searching for the hidden trap behind her sudden generosity. Rebecca reveals that the paper contains the exact location of his hidden family, offering him the power to protect them himself if he chooses to join her crusade. Robert laughs bitterly, accusing her of using the exact same clumsy, coercive tactics the Count has used to keep him under lock and key. With chilling authority, Rebecca orders him to take the information anyway, refusing to let his stubborn pride ruin his only chance at freedom. Overwhelmed by her boldness, Robert questions her reckless strategy, asking why she would hand over her only leverage before securing his loyalty. Rebecca counters with a disarming truth. She knows that true Kadirgo believers are bound by an ancient code of absolute honor, incapable of lying or betrayal. Robert fiercely refutes her trust, pointing to the ugly scar on his forehead as proof that he tore away his faith and abandoned his family long ago. Rebecca merely shakes her head with a knowing, gentle smile, refusing to be fooled by his bitter, defensive facade. She reveals she has long noticed his silent, subtle acts of mercy to protect her from the shadows, proving that his humanity is far from dead. Robert is left speechless, staring at her with a sudden, overwhelming dread, as he realizes she has read every secret he tried so desperately to hide. Rebecca strikes the final devastating blow, asking him if he can truly bear to watch the monstrous Count live happily after all the horrors he has inflicted upon them. With a fierce, blazing determination in her blue eyes, she reaches out her hand, inviting him to join her in a quest for absolute merciless revenge to destroy Zeppelin once and for all. Robert stares at her outstretched hand, his heart pounding as her promise of equal retribution echoes in the silent moonlit night. For the first time in years, the suffocating darkness that had trapped Robert in a hopeless pit of despair begins to yield to a blinding ray of hope. He remembers the endless years of servitude, standing silently behind a smiling monster, believing there was no escape from the Count's eternal torment. But looking at Rebecca's fiercely determined gaze, he realizes the chains of his golden cage are finally cracking, setting the stage for a rebellion that will tear the Devonshire estate to the ground. Robert's chest tightens with a sudden, overwhelming realization. He is being asked to participate in a lethal, high-stakes rebellion against the very tyrant who holds his life in his hands. As he gazes back at Rebecca, the fear in his eyes begins to give way to something far more dangerous, a spark of defiance that has been dormant for years. Without another second of hesitation, Robert drops to one knee and presses his hand to his heart, offering a solemn vow of absolute loyalty to the mistress of the estate. Now bound to her cause, he quietly asks where they must strike first, prompting Rebecca to order him to gather critical intelligence on the Count's elite shadowy hounds. With their deadly alliance sealed in the shadows, Kana swiftly carries her mistress back through the dark garden, their quiet movements masking the storm about to unleash. As a bright, clean morning breaks over the towering Devonshire estate, the first fruits of Robert's dangerous espionage are delivered directly to Rebecca's private chambers. Rebecca carefully inspects the detailed documents, but her sharp mind immediately notices a glaring omission. The one crucial target she needs most is entirely missing from the reports. Her thoughts lock on to Grace Duncan, the formidable headmaid whose deep, unspoken secrets could unlock every hidden corner of the estate. This mysterious woman's allegiance does not belong to the usurper Zeppelin, but rather to the true, historic lineage of the Devonshire family itself. Unlike the other hounds under the Count's thumb, Grace has no living family left, leaving Zeppelin with absolutely no leverage to force her obedience. And yet, her unwavering loyalty to the estate remains a powerful, untapped weapon waiting to be wielded by the right hands. Rebecca realizes that if she ever hopes to survive this war and claim her vengeance, she must find a way to win over the headmaid's fierce loyalty. Handing the highly classified documents back to Kana, Rebecca calmly commands her to burn every single page to ensure their conspiracy remains buried. Kana accepts the papers with a silent nod, fully aware of the executioner's blade that awaits them both if these secrets are discovered. Seizing the rare moment of quiet, Rebecca asks about Zeppelin's whereabouts, learning with a thrill of anticipation that the Count has left for an all-day council meeting. With the monster finally gone, Rebecca swings her legs out of bed, her bandaged feet touching the cold floor as she prepares to set her secret plans into motion. She stands tall, a quiet fire burning in her blue eyes as she tells Kana that they must seize this perfect, temporary window of absolute freedom. Meanwhile, in the sunlit courtyard, Grace Duncan's sharp voice slices through the air as she aggressively scolds the low-ranking servants for their sloppy work. With a cold huff of disdain, the headmaid turns on her heel to resume her strict patrol, entirely unaware of the invisible eyes tracking her every move. Sneaking through the shadows, Kana keeps a careful watch on Grace's path, noting that the woman is heading directly toward the male servants' quarters. She recalls Grace's long history of tough but fair discipline, knowing that beneath that harsh exterior lies a woman of genuine, albeit buried, integrity. Although Grace does not pose an immediate threat, Kana knows that a single slip-up in her presence could ruin their entire plan before it even begins. Suddenly, Grace halts in her tracks, her highly trained instincts flaring as she senses an unnatural disturbance in the quiet air. Above them, a faint trail of shimmering essence drifts silently past the high castle windows, carrying an urgent message through the estate. Grace narrows her eyes in deep suspicion, staring intently at the fading light as if she is on the very verge of discovering their hidden path. Out in the outer courtyard, the coast is momentarily clear, offering a narrow, dangerous route to the edge of the property. Tucked away in the thick stone wall is a tiny, hidden tunnel overgrown with ivy, the perfect portal to escape the castle's suffocating grip. Waiting patiently in the shadows, Robert hands over a tightly wrapped parcel, delivering the precise civilian disguise Rebecca requested. Shedding her heavy, restrictive noble gowns, Rebecca transforms into a common boy, her spirit instantly lighter in the comfortable attire. Robert is momentarily stunned by her bold transformation, his cheeks flushing as Rebecca playfully teases him about her newfound freedom. But his playfulness quickly fades as he sternly warns her to make haste, reminding her that the Count could return early and seal her fate. Back in the master bedroom, a carefully arranged dummy rests beneath the heavy sheets, ensuring that any nosy guards believe the mistress is still sound asleep. Crouching low, Rebecca slips through the narrow gap in the stone wall, stepping beyond the boundaries of her prison for the first time in years. She offers a parting smile of gratitude to her loyal accomplices, her heart racing with the terrifying thrill of the unknown. Moments later, she successfully boards a passing merchant carriage, the steady clatter of the wheels signaling her escape from Devonshire. Taking a deep, ragged breath of the fresh morning air, she realizes with a swell of emotion that she is finally truly free. Looking back at the distant towers of her prison, the vastness of the world outside suddenly feels incredibly vast and filled with endless potential. The carriage finally rolls to a gentle stop in a lush green clearing, and Rebecca steps down to thank the kind driver for his generosity. When she asks for his name, the driver beams with a warm, genuine smile, introducing himself as Adolf, a local coffee merchant. Waving a cheerful goodbye as the carriage rattles away, Rebecca turns toward her destination, her playful demeanor instantly hardening into focus. She is immediately met by a dark, weathered sign warning any travelers that interference will bring absolute ruin. Beside it, a second, even more ominous warning promises that truly terrifying consequences await anyone brave enough to step past the threshold. Nestled deep in the shadowy forest is a secluded, dark cottage that radiates a deeply unsettling defensive aura. Unfazed by the hostile warnings, Rebecca confidently approaches the entrance of the legendary Eustaph's Botanical Laboratory. Her target is Eustaff McQueen, a brilliant but notoriously reclusive herbalist who uncovered the devastating secrets of the devil's claw poison. Knowing that even the merciless Zeppelin failed to recruit this master of toxins, Rebecca prepares herself for the ultimate negotiation. She hammers her fist against the heavy wooden door, calling out for the eccentric scholar under his well-known local alias. When only silence answers her, she bangs even harder, determined to breach his isolation no matter what it takes to secure his deadly talents. Suddenly, the heavy door slams open with violent force, revealing a highly irritated, silver-haired man who snarls a ferocious warning to get lost. Looking directly into his furious eyes, Rebecca stands her ground, ready to play her most dangerous card to force the master of poisons to join her cause. Coughing violently as thick, heavy smoke billows into her face, Rebecca is momentarily choked by the bitter scent of premium tobacco as the reclusive scholar looms in the doorway. Swallowing her discomfort, she quickly recovers her composure and presents her purpose with a polite, disarming smile, boldly offering him a proposal he cannot easily ignore. But Eustace's eyes narrow with bitter contempt, instantly assuming she is merely another low-ranking servant sent by the tyrant Count Zeppelin to exploit his genius. Before she can even explain, he snaps a harsh refusal, slamming the heavy wooden door shut with a deafening bang that echoes through the quiet forest. Refusing to be cast aside so easily, Rebecca calls out through the thick wood, casually mentioning a rare, exquisite gift she brought from the fertile lands of Montpierre. The temptation proves entirely irresistible, and the door immediately swings open again as Eustace stares at her in stunned silence, practically demanding she step inside. Entering his secluded sanctuary, Rebecca finds herself surrounded by towering shelves lined with rare texts, reflecting a lifetime of obsessive, forbidden research. Sunbeams filter through the glass windows, illuminating a collection of delicate, rare botanical specimens that the eccentric herbalist has kept hidden from the outside world. Letting his guard down, Eustace eagerly takes a bite of the rare potato, complaining bitterly about how modern cultivation has stripped the natural crops of their true, powerful flavors. Rebecca sits patiently across from her, her sharp eyes scanning the room as she prepares to steer their conversation toward her true, lethal objective. Her gaze locks onto a stack of heavily annotated volumes, immediately recognizing advanced treatises on forbidden botany and the lethal properties of the devil's claw. Swallowing his meal, Eustace sits back and demands to know the exact details of her proposal, his voice dripping with deep, lingering suspicion. Gently sliding the heavy texts aside, Rebecca confidently asserts that his true obsession lies in mastering the lethal properties of the devil's claw. She steps closer to a delicate potted plant, examining its leaves with a practiced eye that surprises the reclusive botanist. Pointing out a series of dark, mottled spots on the foliage, she casually suggests that his failing specimen is suffering from improper temperature control. Eustace's posture stiffens instantly, his eyes flashing with sudden defensiveness as he accuses her of being a highly trained specialist sent to manipulate his mind. Rebecca calmly dispels his fears, flatly denying any connection to Count Zeppelin and asserting her independence from the tyrant's grip. Perplexed by her defiance, Eustace demands to know her true identity, unable to comprehend what kind of noble would walk such a dangerous path. Offering a mysterious, confident smile, Rebecca counters by asking if he isn't more interested in the extraordinary resources she can offer him. Eustace scoffs in disbelief, claiming that many powerful nobles have promised him grand laboratories, only to betray him once they secured his deadly formulas. Rebecca strikes a devastating blow to his skepticism, asking how he would react if she built his dream laboratory in the legendary city of Montpierre. She rests her chin on her hands with an absolute, dazzling confidence, knowing she has just offered him the ultimate botanical paradise. Montpierre, the legendary port city of the Johannes Duchy, is a thriving hub of global logistics and possesses some of the most fertile soil in the entire realm. For an ambitious, reclusive botanist like Eustace, having an unrestricted sanctuary in such a blessed region is a lifelong dream within arm's reach. Yet, the astronomical cost of land in such a prime territory has always made it an impossible dream for a solitary, unrecognized researcher. Rebecca leans forward, promising him absolute academic freedom and financial backing, leaving his research completely unmonitored. Stunned by the overwhelming generosity of her terms, Eustace narrows his eyes, warily asking what catch could possibly be hidden beneath such a perfect deal. Feigning a sudden fit of coughing, Rebecca politely requests a simple cup of tea to soothe her dry throat, creating a clever diversion to buy herself time. Realizing his poor manners, Eustace hastily stands up and heads toward the back room, leaving his guest completely unattended in his study. The moment he disappears from sight, Rebecca's polite facade vanishes, her eyes turning incredibly sharp as she seizes the perfect opportunity to search his desk. She quickly flips open his private journal, reading his secret experiments detailing how the dry devil's claw can miraculously purify toxic water. Her heart races as she realizes he has unlocked the key to neutralizing the deadly poison, though a critical piece of the puzzle still remains unsolved. Hearing his footsteps return, she quietly closes the book just as Eustace places a cup of freshly brewed, steaming herbal tea before her. The two sit in a tense, quiet silence, sipping their tea as the crackling fireplace warms the heavily guarded room. Breaking the silence with a devastating revelation, Rebecca casually states that he desperately needs human test subjects to complete his research, prompting Eustace to spit his tea in absolute shock. Gasping for air, the silver-haired botanist stares at her in sheer terror, demanding to know how she could have possibly uncovered his deepest, most illegal secret. With an innocent, disarming smile, Rebecca confesses to reading his open journal notes while he was busy preparing their tea in the kitchen. She praises his brilliant theories, claiming her powerful benefactor would be highly eager to fund his controversial research. She lays out her terms, promising to supply him with an endless stream of test subjects and the rarest seeds of the elusive devil's claw. Despite the tempting offer, Eustace stubbornly refuses, his pride and deep-seated paranoia holding him back from accepting her hand. He explains his bitter past, fearing that some arrogant noble will inevitably steal his hard work and cast him aside once the research succeeds. Suddenly slamming his hands onto the table, Eustace stands up in a furious rage, offended that she would dare dismiss his lifetime achievement as a trivial honor. Rebecca remains unfazed, looking up at him with a calm, piercing gaze as she praises his creation as a legendary panacea that will change the world. Her genuine recognition strikes a deep chord within his heart, catching him completely off guard as he stares at her in stunned, emotional silence. For years, the academic elite had ridiculed his brilliant theories, branding him a dangerous lunatic and casting him out into the cold. Trembling with a mixture of hope and fear, Eustace warily asks if her employer is involved in any illicit underworld business that could ruin his career. In response, Rebecca slowly slides a brilliant, solid gold medallion across the polished wooden table, letting the light catch its intricate engravings. Eustace's breath hitches in absolute disbelief as he recognizes the unmistakable, prestigious crest of Duke Johannes gleaming before his eyes. Realizing the immense power and absolute legitimacy backing her, his skepticism completely dissolves as he eagerly asks where he must sign the contract. With her primary weapon secured, Rebecca prepares to return to the grand Devonshire estate, ready to unleash a devastating storm of vengeance upon her enemies. Madame Obelia stands in the grand courtyard, her gaze shifting warily as she takes in the staggering scale of the Johannes estate, realizing Rebecca's plan to ally with this family is far more ambitious than she ever imagined. A deep, resonant voice suddenly breaks her train of thought, and she turns to find the young lord of the house welcoming her into his luxurious domain. Introducing himself with effortless grace and a charming smile, Julian Johannes greets her, but the sharp intelligence gleaming in his eyes warns her that this man is no ordinary noble to be trifled with. As they sit across from one another in the opulently decorated parlor, Julian immediately cuts to the chase, inquiring about her sudden, ambitious plans to launch a new business enterprise. Swallowing her nervousness, Madame Obelia raises her teacup, trying to maintain a poise of calm confidence while silently hoping she can execute her daughter's complex scheme without raising suspicion. Julian offers an encouraging, smooth smile, assuring her of his complete faith since she has successfully steered the Obelia family through their darkest, most difficult times. He leans forward with a warm, disarming gesture, insisting that because she is Rebecca's mother, she is practically his own, inviting her to speak with absolute comfort. In truth, Rebecca's secret strategy is already unfolding behind the scenes. During their private meetings, Julian had offered to simply pay off all her family's crippling debts, only for Rebecca to refuse. She had flatly rejected his easy charity, explaining that simple handouts would only enable her reckless father to sink them into ruin once again, making a permanent shift in power absolutely necessary. Her vision was clear and uncompromising. She was determined to secure two critical pillars of power, the total leadership of her family home and the prestigious Liberta Relief House. Back in the present, Yulian's sharp gaze focuses on Madame Obelia, gently asking her to reveal the exact lucrative details of this mysterious business venture. Setting her nerves aside, Madame Obelia confidently takes the lead, ready to present the revolutionary proposal her daughter designed to conquer the capital's high society. She confidently slides a meticulously drafted document across the table, introducing a concept that has never been seen before in the Empire, a rental salon. Yulian's eyes scan the intricate proposal, immediately recognizing the brilliant financial and social leverage hidden behind a seemingly simple idea. Madame Obelia explains the hidden burdens of noblewomen who are constantly forced to redecorate their estates to match seasonal trends, all while whispering secrets under the watchful, untrustworthy eyes of gossiping servants. By offering heavily guarded, beautifully curated rental spaces, they will provide the perfect sanctuary for elite ladies to gather in absolute secrecy. It is a masterstroke. Noblewomen can host flawless, trend-setting salons at a fraction of the cost, completely insulated from the prying ears of their husbands' spies. Yet, Yulian remains analytical, raising a hand to his chin as he warily points out that the prideful nobility usually loathes anything mass-produced or ready-made. When he demands to know how she can be so utterly certain of their success, Madame Obelia's expression shifts into one of deep, triumphant confidence. She smiles softly, admitting that her certainty stems from her own painful past, as this sanctuary is the exact lifeline she spent a lifetime desperately wishing for. She reminds him that not every noblewoman possesses the vast time or endless fortunes required to maintain appearances, and a highly exclusive private salon is precisely what they crave. Watching her slide the final contract forward, Yulian is captivated by her sharp resolve, seeing the undeniable spark of genius that runs in the Obelia bloodline. His lips curl into a genuine smile as he realizes Rebecca was entirely correct. Her mother is more than capable of ruling her family with an iron fist. As the grandfather clock chimes in the background, Yulian officially approves the venture, sealing a partnership that will soon turn the Empire's social hierarchy upside down. Preparing to take her leave, Madame Obelia pauses at the doorway, her maternal instinct suddenly prompting her to ask one final, deeply personal question. She looks back and bluntly asks what it was about her dangerous, complicated daughter that captured his heart, catching the powerful lord completely off guard. Yulian hesitates, the question forcing him to look deep within his own memories of the fierce woman who changed his life. He remembers the breathtaking moment she stood before him, fearlessly promising to break the ancient, deadly curse tormenting his beloved little sister. The memory of her piercing, beautiful blue eyes flashes in his mind, eyes filled with an unyielding, dangerous determination that no one else could match. Breaking his silence, Yulian simply replies that he liked her because she was cool, leaving her mother utterly bewildered by his unconventional choice of words. With a fun, nostalgic smile, he explains that of all the women he has ever encountered, Rebecca possessed the most captivating, fierce look in her eyes. Meanwhile, far from the peaceful warmth of the Johannes estate, the looming towers of the Grand Devonshire Manor cast long, ominous shadows in the setting sun. Sneaking through the servant's entrance in a dusty traveler's disguise, Rebecca urgently whispers to her loyal ally, demanding to know if the ruthless Count Zeppelin has returned. Robert sighs in deep relief, warning her that while the Count is still away, her reckless excursions are putting their entire operation at extreme risk. He quickly hands her a uniform, pleading with her to change out of her traveling gear immediately before the rest of the household gathers for dinner. Slipping into her maid's attire, Rebecca holds a pristine white flower, prompting a curious Robert to ask what part this botanical specimen plays in her master plan. Handing her a tray of freshly brewed tea, Robert explains that the flower serves as their ultimate insurance, instructing her to consume a small antidote beforehand. Carrying the tray, Rebecca swiftly moves down the grand staircase, confident that the bustling dinner preparations will provide the perfect cover for her stealthy moves. Dragon! Suddenly, a cold, authoritative voice calls out Robert's name, freezing the air around them and halting their footsteps instantly. The formidable head maid steps out of the shadows, her sharp, calculating eyes locking onto Rebecca with intense suspicion. A tense, suffocating silence descends upon the hallway as the head maid repeats his name, her gaze narrowing as she senses something is deeply amiss. Demanding to know the identity of the unfamiliar maid standing beside him, he steps closer, threatening to unravel Rebecca's disguise in a single second. Rebecca's heart hammers violently against her ribs as she looks down, desperately trying to keep her face hidden in the dim light. Thinking on his feet, Robert quickly speaks up, claiming that the young girl is merely assisting him in delivering hot tea to the madam's private chambers. The headmaid's critical gaze slowly sweeps over the tea tray, analyzing every detail of their story for any hint of deceit. Fortunately, the excuse holds, and her rigid posture softens slightly as she warns them not to keep their demanding mistress waiting a moment longer. Before dismissing them, the headmaid delivers a vital command, ordering them to inform the madam that Lady Fabiola will be arriving at the estate tomorrow. Hearing that dreaded name, Rebecca's eyes widen in sheer shock, her blood running ice cold as a wave of dark, painful memories floods her mind. Fabiola Devonshire, a name synonymous with absolute cruelty, terror, and relentless oppression. Behind her public facade of a submissive, elegant wife lies the monstrous mother-in-law who had brutally tormented Rebecca in her past life, signaling that her ultimate nightmare is about to walk through the front door. The painful memories of her past life hit Rebecca with a cold, suffocating weight, specifically the day she married Count Zeppelin and instantly became the target of his mother's deep-seated jealousy. Fabiola's torment was relentless. The cruel woman would deliberately drop expensive desserts onto the floor, staring down with a mockery of fake pity as she pretended it was a mere accident. With a sickening smirk, Fabiola would demand that Rebecca drop to her knees and lick the ruined cake off the dusty floor, orchestrating a brutal psychological war designed to shatter her dignity. Thankfully, in this massive manner, secrets were impossible to keep. Once Zeppelin discovered his mother's monstrous acts, he banished her from the estate, though she would still dare to return unannounced to haunt them. Back in the present, Zeppelin's gentle voice pulls Rebecca back to reality as he asks if she is comfortable, pushing her across the polished floors of the grand estate. But the luxury is a deceptive facade. She is trapped in a grand, customized wheelchair, bound by heavy iron chains that reveal her true status as a gilded prisoner. Zeppelin plays the part of a caring husband, insisting that the doctor wants her to enjoy the fresh air rather than wasting away in bed, totally oblivious to the silent rebellion brewing in her mind. Rebecca smiles sweetly while keeping her gaze low, acutely aware that this elaborate wheelchair is nothing more than a beautifully crafted leash, restricting her path to the tight perimeter of his garden. Suddenly, a hurried butler breaks the quiet afternoon, announcing that the dreaded Lady Fabiola has just arrived at the gates. Zeppelin's expression darkens immediately as he commands Rebecca to return inside, intending to leave his bitter mother to be dealt with by Alicia. Rebecca, however, insists on fulfilling her duty as a perfect wife, her lips curling into a sharp, hidden grin as she prepares to face her old tormentor face to face. Guided by her silent maid, Rebecca is wheeled down the stone paths toward the massive glass greenhouse, where the cold draft of tension is already creeping in. Inside the sunlit conservatory, Fabiola is already deep into her power games, sitting across from a tense Alicia as she asserts her dominant presence over the manor. In an instant, Fabiola throws her hot tea directly onto the table, her voice dripping with venomous disdain as she complains that the brew is entirely cold. Demanding absolute obedience, the older woman holds out her cup, ordering Alicia to discard the ruined tea and pour a fresh cup immediately. Fighting back her rising anger, Alicia forces a submissive nod and pours the tea, her hands trembling under Fabiola's suffocating, critical glare. But Fabiola is never satisfied. Taking a mere sip, she immediately complains that the tea is now far too hot, pushing her victim's patience to the absolute limit. Seeing the trap, Alicia rises from her chair, her eyes burning with a cold, desperate fury as she decides she will no longer be the submissive punching bag. In a shocking turn of events, Alicia swings her hand and violently strikes the helpless maid standing beside them, catching even the ruthless Fabiola completely off guard. Deflecting the blame with terrifying calculation, Alicia coldly claims that since the tea is never the right temperature, it must be the servant's fault, redirecting Fabiola's rage away from herself. Outraged by the display of pure hostility, Fabiola points a trembling finger, spitting that Alicia's low-born roots are finally exposing her vulgar, unrefined character. Alicia shoots back with a mocking laugh, asking Fabiola just how noble her own lineage is when her precious son refuses to even step outside to greet his own mother. Watching the vicious exchange from the shadows, Rebecca feels a dark wave of satisfaction, realizing that neither of these wicked women has changed a single bit. She quickly deduces Fabiola's strategy. The old matriarch is trying to crush Alicia's spirit to prevent her from turning Zeppelin against her, but now the dynamic has completely shifted. Deciding it is time to make her move, Rebecca rolls into the greenhouse with a flawless, mock-cheerful smile, warmly greeting her monstrous mother-in-law. Fabiola turns her gaze to Rebecca, her eyes scanning her with fake concern as she brings up the rumors of Rebecca's severe injuries. Rebecca reassures her that the wound is trivial, casually asking about the intense shouting that echoed through the conservatory just moments ago. Hiding her malice behind a laugh, Fabiola claims she was merely teaching manners, prompting Rebecca to warn Alicia to show the utmost care around her mother-in-law. Alicia is left completely bewildered, her eyes widening in disbelief as she tries to comprehend why Rebecca is suddenly siding with their tormentor. The atmosphere grows thick with unspoken hostility as the three women sit around the elegant table, each hiding a deadly dagger behind their smiles. Rebecca raises her teacup to her lips, taking a slow, analytical sip of the specially prepared brew. Suddenly, her eyes widen in a moment of pure, bone-chilling realization as she recognizes a distinct metallic flavor hiding beneath the floral notes. Looking at the cup with intense focus, she realizes Fabiola is actively poisoning her, trying to silence her permanently under the guise of maternal visits. Moving with blinding speed, Rebecca deliberately knocks her cup over, sending the scalding liquid splashing directly onto Alicia's bare skin. Screaming in agonizing pain, Alicia accuses her of doing it on purpose, while Rebecca instantly covers her mouth in a display of dramatic, fake horror. Rebecca maintains her sweet, innocent act, gasping that she would never do such a thing, while coldly warning Alicia that burns leave permanent scars if not treated instantly. Terrified of being permanently disfigured, Alicia leaps from her seat and flees the greenhouse, screaming hysterically for her servants to bring medicine. As the echoes of Alicia's screams fade, a heavy, suffocating silence falls over the conservatory as Fabiola glares at Rebecca with intense, calculating suspicion. Looking down with fake vulnerability, Rebecca softly confesses that she behaved exactly as Fabiola expected. Intrigued by her sudden submission, Fabiola demands to know exactly what Rebecca means by those cryptic words. Rebecca forces tears into her eyes, whimpering that she only spilled the tea because her heart is consumed by bitter resentment toward Alicia. Fabiola leans forward, her eyes gleaming with dark curiosity as she asks if Rebecca is admitting to being consumed by petty jealousy. Putting on a brilliant performance, Rebecca cries that Alicia is prettier and has already secured an heir, leaving her terrified that Zeppelin will eventually abandon her. Fabiola silently analyzes this sudden vulnerability, remembering how Rebecca used to endure her worst torments without a single tear, wondering if she has finally broken her. Realizing that Rebecca is just another weak woman desperate to keep her husband's love, Fabiola's face stretches into a triumphant, predatory grin. Gently patting Rebecca's hand, the old viper reassures her that she has nothing to fear, promising that she will always be the one true countess of this house. Hiding her absolute disgust, Rebecca squeezes Fabiola's hand in return, whispering that her mother-in-law's words have finally brought peace to her fragile heart. Taking the bait even further, Rebecca asks about the soothing tea, claiming it brought her an incredible sense of tranquility, and asking if Fabiola brought it herself. Delighted that her poison is working so flawlessly, Fabiola proudly admits it is a special blend she created, offering to leave an abundant supply behind for her to drink daily. Back in her private chambers later that night, Rebecca stares coldly at the glass jar of deadly tea, her helpless persona completely vanishing as she prepares to turn this poison into her ultimate weapon of ruin. Rebecca sighs in deep relief back in her private quarters, the suffocating tension of dealing with her toxic mother-in-law and scheming rival finally lifting. But her peace is short-lived as a strange sound breaks the quiet night. Glancing toward the window, her breath catches as she spots a dark, familiar silhouette looking in at her from the cold darkness outside. To her absolute delight, the window reveals Leo, her beloved black cat, letting out a soft, affectionate meow, as if he has been searching for her all night. Wasting no time, she opens the window and pours a fresh dish of milk, recalling her maid's words that cats absolutely adore it. Rebecca smiles warmly, hoping the small treat will bring some comfort to her mysterious feline companion, entirely unaware that a shocking presence is creeping up right behind her. Suddenly, a deep, hauntingly familiar voice calls out her name, causing her entire body to freeze in absolute terror as she slowly turns to face the intruder. Meanwhile, earlier that evening, Duke Johannes is seen staring intensely at a small, hand-drawn picture, his mind plagued by deep, unresolved memories of his tragic past. The drawing depicts a bittersweet scene of his childhood, a young boy and a pink-haired girl playing happily in a field of green, surrounded by playful cats under a bright sun. His loyal assistant hesitantly breaks his train of thought, asking if they should return the mysterious gift yet again, just as they have done every single year. Weary and emotionally drained, Johannes dismisses him with a cold wave, wanting nothing more than to be left alone with his bitter thoughts. Leaving the study, the assistant is immediately met by an anxious maid who eagerly whispers to ask how the Duke reacted to the delicate matter. When the assistant reveals that the Duke did not reject it this time, the maid gasps in delight, thrilled that the mysterious young lady might finally receive a glimmer of hope. Yet, they remain utterly baffled by the Duke's sudden change of heart, wondering if guilt has finally pierced his frozen exterior, completely unaware that Leo is watching their exchange from the dark shadows. Moving like a phantom, the black cat slips silently through the heavy doors, heading straight toward the Duke's private chambers. Inside, Johannes sits alone on a velvet sofa, a half-empty bottle of wine in his hand as he bitterly invites his feline companion to join him in drowning his sorrows. He chuckles humorlessly, remembering that Leo has no interest in mortal spirits, requiring nothing but the Duke's own raw divine power to sustain himself. Leo fixes him with a sharp, judgmental glare, silently scolding the powerful Duke for acting so pathetic on his own birthday, prompting Johannes to sigh in self-pity. Johannes leans back, pleading with the cat to show a sliver of sympathy to his lonely soulmate, his heart heavy with the crushing weight of his unnatural existence. A dark, agonizing truth flashes through his mind. He is a cursed being, destined only to produce descendants to carry on his lineage, treated as nothing more than a biological vessel. Even worse, he is an immortal spectator, forced to watch his own children wither and die over and over again, cursing the divine heavens for such a sadistic fate. Pouring another glass of crimson wine, Johannes wonders what he would even become if this monstrous curse were ever lifted, realizing that his entire identity as the sacred Duke is built on a lie. He drinks deeply, desperate to numb the existential dread eating away at his soul, while Leo watches him with a silent, calculating plan. Suddenly, Leo stands tall on the edge of the sofa, his eyes glowing with an ancient, otherworldly power as he prepares to make a drastic move. With a telepathic birthday wish, the cat leaps into the air, triggering a brilliant flash of magical light that distorts the very fabric of space. In a blinding instant, the space in Rebecca's bedroom warps, and the massive figure of Duke Johannes suddenly materializes right before her startled eyes. Shocked to the core, Rebecca stumbles backward, demandingly asking how on earth he entered her locked chambers and where Leo vanished to. Johannes is equally stunned, his eyes widening in pure confusion as he realizes he has been suddenly yanked away from his study and into her bedroom. Panicking that the castle guards or her captors will hear them, Rebecca lunges forward and forcefully covers his mouth with her hand. She presses her body close to his, whispering a frantic warning to stay silent as the threat of discovery looms just outside the heavy wooden doors. Staring down at her, Johannes suddenly chuckles through his nose, a wave of realization hitting him as he curses the scheming black cat for setting him up. Backing away to give her space, Johannes playfully mocks her, noting that even the all-knowing Rebecca seems entirely clueless about how they just swap places. Rebecca's eyes narrow in sharp irritation, wondering if the smell of alcohol on his breath means he is simply too drunk to realize the mortal danger they are in. Unbothered by her fury, Johannes casually slumps onto her pristine bed, completely disregarding all royal decorum in his dazed state. He smirks up at her, teasingly asking why she is glaring at him as if he is some undisciplined child with no manners. Rebecca retorts that she was merely observing his sheer lack of etiquette, prompting him to admit that he has never cared for useless noble formalities anyway. Johannes leans in closer, his gaze softening as he reminds her that since they are destined to marry soon, they might as well skip the stiff honorifics and get comfortable. Sighing in defeat, Rebecca decides to play along, telling him she will accept his terms if it means keeping his voice down. Her dry submission only amuses Johannes further, his lips curling into a genuine, handsome smile that catches her completely off guard. He admits that her calm reaction is incredibly rare, as most women would have screamed in terror at a man suddenly appearing in their bedroom, but Rebecca remains focused, demanding to know the truth behind Leo's magic. Johannes casually reveals that he and Leo share a supernatural bond, prompting Rebecca to gasp in disbelief as she asks if he is actually the cat himself. He quickly clarifies that they cannot swap minds, but rather swap locations instantly, describing it as a rare and powerful form of spatial teleportation. Resting his chin on his hand, Johannes studies her unbothered expression, deeply intrigued by why such a shocking revelation barely registers on her face. Rebecca looks away coldly, muttering that after dying and clawing her way back to life, a simple teleportation spell is hardly enough to scare her. Her profound words hang heavily in the quiet room as Johannes stares at her with a piercing, analytical gaze, trying to peel back the layers of her mysterious soul. He softly remarks that she often speaks like someone who has lived an entire extra lifetime, causing Rebecca's heart to skip a beat as she fears her ultimate secret has been exposed. Shaking off her panic, she urgently commands him to teleport back to his estate immediately, warning him that staying in this hostile manner is suicide. Johannes sighs, raising 3 fingers as he explains that spatial teleportation completely drains his divine energy, requiring at least 3 hours of rest before he can jump again. Realizing she is trapped with the Duke in her bedroom for the next 3 hours, Rebecca groans in sheer frustration, forcing him to promise he will vanish the exact second his power returns. Shifting her focus to their secret alliance, Rebecca quietly inquires if his merchant guild is progressing according to her grand master plan. Johannes reassures her that every single detail has been flawlessly handled, but his expression darkens as he asks how they will coordinate their next move when she is locked away like a beautiful bird in a gilded cage. Revealing the bandages wrapped tightly around her leg, Rebecca calmly explains that her weakness is a necessary facade, especially now when she must pretend to be completely broken. Johannes stares in sudden, overwhelming panic, demanding to know how badly she is hurt and why she kept such a painful secret from him. Rebecca quickly silences his panic, admitting with a cold, calculating whisper that she threw herself down the stairs on purpose, leaving Johannes utterly baffled by her extreme measures. Her gaze softens with a tragic resolve as she whispers that enduring temporary pain is the only path left to reclaim her stolen freedom. Johannes looks at her with a heavy, pained expression, realizing she is treating herself like a broken doll that must be left alone until its pieces are put back together. Shifting to their shared agenda, Rebecca asks what he requires to secure her divorce within a month, though she admits her merchant guild must first grow and her secret plans require more time to take root. Johannes' eyes glint with dangerous confidence as he smirks, boldly promising that he will manipulate the timeline and make the divorce happen within just 2 months. Touched by his fierce assurance, Rebecca looks up at him, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips as the heavy tension in the room begins to melt away. Driven by a sudden, tender impulse, she reaches out, her fingers gently brushing through his dark hair to soothe the lingering exhaustion of his cursed existence. Johannes' breath catches in his throat, his heart hammering violently against his chest as the warmth of her touch cuts through his centuries of cold isolation. In a sudden flurry of emotion, he reaches up and firmly grasps her hand, unwilling to let go of the only light in his dark existence. Locked in a breathless gaze, the distance between them vanishes, replaced by a raw, magnetic pull that neither of them can deny. Under the soft moonlight filtering through the window, they hold each other's hands tightly, the boundaries of their formal alliance completely dissolving into something far more intimate. Their hearts beat in a frantic, synchronized rhythm as they lean closer, the air between them thick with unspoken desires and undeniable passion. Inches apart, the world outside fades into absolute silence as they surrender to the overwhelming warmth of the moment, ready to seal their dangerous bond with a kiss. Clinging to each other as if they are each other's only anchor in a storm, their fingers interlock tightly, sealing a silent vow of loyalty and devotion. Suddenly, a sharp burst of magical energy shatters the romantic silence, warping the space around them and tearing them apart in an instant. In a blink of an eye, the powerful Duke vanishes completely, replaced on the bed by none other than Leo, the mischievous black cat, looking up innocently. Sensing his master's utter frustration from across the spatial link, Leo lets out an annoyed, defensive hiss, clearly aware that his perfect timing just ruined a critical moment. Rebecca sighs, pulling the small feline into her arms as she realizes the 3-hour limit has expired, returning the Duke to his own distant estate. Back in his private chambers, Johannes clutches his head in sheer disbelief, groaning at the sudden forced teleportation that dragged him away right when he was closest to her. His mind reels, plagued by the vivid memory of Rebecca's gentle touch lingering on his skin, a sensation he never expected to feel again. He remembers the look of shock on her face, realizing that she too was caught in the intoxicating pull of their sudden intimacy. Overwhelmed by frustration and a racing heart, the mighty Duke collapses onto his bed, covering his eyes as his composure completely fails him. He curses under his breath, utterly exasperated by his own racing pulse and the scheming cat that holds the key to his teleportation power. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the newly formed Merchant Guild, a furious voice echoes through the halls, protesting against being used as a mere puppet. Inside, Tanisha Chenister glares at her brother, the Duke's trusted assistant, demanding to know why she was promised her own guild only to be treated as a figurehead president. Her brother tries to calm her down, insisting the business is legally registered in her name, but Tanisha remains livid, refusing to be a shield for a mysterious mastermind she has never even met. When her brother dismisses her concerns, Tanisha smirks, threatening to expose a highly embarrassing secret about how his clumsy grooming gave the Duke's feline form a bald spot. Terrified of the Duke's wrath, the assistant completely panics, begging his sister to keep quiet and promising to reveal everything she wants to know. Leaning in close, he conspiratorially whispers the true identity of the brilliant woman pulling the strings of their massive merchant empire. Back at the estate, Count Zeppelin prepares to depart, falsely offering Rebecca words of concern for her health while secretly plotting his next move. He turns a stern, warning gaze toward his mistress Alicia, demanding that she behave herself in his absence. Alicia flashes a saccharine, obedient smile, assuring him of her complete loyalty while harboring her own dark, ambitious schemes. Satisfied with her submission, Zeppelin chuckles darkly, convinced that his cruel dominance has perfectly trained the women in his household. As the carriage rolls away, Rebecca watches from her wheelchair, her helpless expression instantly shifting into a cold, calculating glare. She realizes the timing of his departure is far too perfect, suspecting that the Emperor's sudden summons was deliberately orchestrated behind the scenes. The memory of Johannes promising to accelerate her freedom within 2 months flashes in her mind, his dark eyes filled with absolute determination. A triumphant smile plays on Rebecca's lips as she realizes the powerful Duke has already begun to move heaven and earth to fulfill his promise to her. Her thoughts are interrupted when her loyal maid, Kana, approaches with a secretive expression, handing her a mysterious note she received at the market. Opening the parchment, Rebecca reads the urgent message from her figurehead president, announcing that the Merchant Guild office is finally prepared for her arrival. Her eyes spark with excitement, thrilled that the foundation of her economic empire is ready and that she will finally meet her partner in crime. Hana looks at her mistress with deep concern, knowing the immense danger of sneaking out of the heavily guarded estate while pretending to be paralyzed. But seeing Rebecca's unshakable resolve, the loyal maid nods in silent agreement, ready to risk her life to aid her mistress's escape. Slipping past the manor guards, Rebecca makes her way into the bustling heart of the capital city, disguised as a humble commoner. Arriving at the secret location, she raises her hand and knocks firmly on the door, her heart hammering with anticipation. The door swings open to reveal Tanisha, who warmly welcomes the visitor inside, entirely unaware of the high noble standing of her guest. Rebecca politely requests to see the guildmaster, prompting Tanisha to proudly introduce herself. curious about the mysterious client standing before her. Removing her modest bonnet, Rebecca stands tall and reveals her breathtaking, unmistakable face, announcing that she is the one who has been searching for her. Gasping in absolute shock, Tanisha stumbles back as she recognizes the true mastermind behind their guild, instantly bowing to hand over the seat of absolute power to her true president. Rebecca's sudden, dramatic entrance catches Tanisha completely off guard, her breath hitching as she tries to process the overwhelming presence of the woman standing before her. Rebecca's piercing blue eyes narrow with a chilling, cold focus, silently assessing the loyalty and capability of the woman who will run her shadow empire. Shaking off the initial tension, Rebecca calmly states her terms, declaring that she has no interest in stealing the spotlight. She intends to remain a silent partner, leaving the public glory entirely to Tanisha. Tanisha's heart hammers against her ribs as she recalls the terrifying rumors of a ruthless mastermind manipulating the great Duke Johannes, bracing herself for an inevitable, brutal battle of wills. But instead of a cold war, Rebecca gets straight to the point, asserting that their time is precious and that her sole ultimate objective in this dangerous game is pure, unadulterated wealth. With absolute confidence, Rebecca proposes a 60-40 profit split, leaving Tanisha completely stunned and scrambling to understand who holds the lion's share of this legendary deal. A brilliant, calculating smile graces Rebecca's lips as she grants Tanisha the 60%, explaining that as the public face of the guild, Tanisha will be the one executing the exhausting, dangerous legwork. Dumbfounded by Rebecca's shocking generosity, Tanisha relaxes slightly, realizing this mysterious noblewoman is far more reasonable and pragmatic than any of the terrifying rumors suggested. Without wasting a single second, Rebecca slides a neatly written parchment across the table, her hand firm as she lays down the secret key to their mutual fortune. Rebecca challenges her new partner to prove her worth, confidently stating that since Tanisha was clever enough to uncover her identity, she must be brilliant enough to exploit the priceless list before her. Tanisha scans the paper, her confusion deepening as she reads the bizarre list of items, seemingly worthless commodities that currently hold absolutely zero value in the capital's markets. Utterly baffled, Tanisha looks up, demanding to know if her mysterious partner possesses some sort of divine prophetic vision to predict such an impossible shift in the market. Rebecca simply smiles, sipping her tea as she secretly revels in her ultimate advantage, knowing exactly which useless items became wildly sought-after luxuries during her tragic first life. She commands Tanisha to immediately monopolize the supply of Tamara ladybugs, warning her that a massive, desperate wave of demand is about to strike the empire. The warm sunlight pours through the window as Rebecca seals the deal, delivering a final, heavy question that demands absolute commitment to their shared master plan. Ignited by Rebecca's fierce determination, Tanisha's eyes spark with sudden ambition as she boldly swears that she will not only try but absolutely guarantee their victory. Satisfied with the burning fire in her partner's eyes, Rebecca smoothly rises from her seat, announcing that her brief, secret excursion must now come to an end. A brief, warm moment of genuine affection flashes between the two women, cementing a surprisingly close bond that goes far deeper than a mere cold business transaction. Pausing at the heavy wooden door, Tanisha urgently asks where she should direct her secret, highly confidential progress reports. Rebecca turns back with a knowing, mischievous glint in her eyes, instructing Tanisha to send everything directly to Julian, ensuring their communications remain flawlessly hidden. Tanisha stands frozen, her cheeks burning with a sudden intense blush as her mind struggles to piece together the implications of this secret network. A sudden realization strikes Tanisha like a lightning bolt, suspecting that the connection between her brother Julian and this brilliant noblewoman is far more intimate than she ever imagined. Meanwhile, far away in the Grand Palace, Duke Johannes stands before the Emperor, breaking the tense silence by inquiring about the ruler's well-being. The Emperor sips his tea with a sharp, calculating gaze, deeply intrigued by the Duke's rare and sudden request for a private audience. Johannes offers his quiet gratitude, noting that his appreciation for the Emperor's recent favor is slightly overdue, prompting a curious glance from the red-haired monarch. Johannes gently swirls his tea, reflecting on the immense kindness the Emperor has shown him over the years, confessing that he has always felt he fell short of truly pleasing his sovereign. With a voice of absolute steel, Johannes delivers a bombshell declaration. Starting today, he is abandoning the Holy Temple to stand firmly and exclusively by the Emperor's side. The shocking announcement causes the Emperor to lose his legendary composure, his hands slamming down as he demands to know what could have possibly driven the Sacred Duke to make such a reckless choice. A genuine, serene smile spreads across Johannes's face as he admits that a certain extraordinary individual inspired him to finally execute a long-dormant plan to dismantle the temple's corrupt grip on the empire. His mind wanders back to his darkest, most painful memories, remembering the paralyzing terror of losing his sacred title and his true identity once his divine curse finally faded. He recalls how laughably pathetic he felt, fighting his entire life to escape the goddess's suffocating shadow, only to cling desperately to earthly wealth as a desperate shield. But the vivid memory of Rebecca's unyielding gaze flashes in his mind, the realization of her willingness to risk her very life for freedom, striking his soul like a thunderous blow, changing him forever. Shifting his focus back to the present, Johannes promises the Emperor that his ultimate secret will be revealed in due time, expressing his desperate urge to prove his absolute loyalty. Intrigued by the sheer conviction in his eyes, the Emperor gestures smoothly, welcoming Johannes's formidable alliance with a sly, knowing smile. Leaning in close, Johannes shifts the conversation to a forbidden topic, quietly bringing up the legendary, long-lost cult of Kadir to test the monarch's reaction. The Emperor recoils in sudden suspicion, demanding to know if the Duke is mad enough to resurrect a dead heretical religion to directly wage war against the almighty goddess Defria. Johannes's gaze turns incredibly dark and sharp as he explains that history repeats itself, asserting that the corrupt temple of Defria is already rotting from within, destined to collapse just like Kadir before it. With a cold, dangerous smirk, Johannes reveals his true, audacious plot. They are not resurrecting the past, but rather building an entirely new religion to shatter the temple's iron grip. Laying out the damning evidence, Johannes reveals a highly confidential document detailing Pope Deserakino's disgusting hypocrisy and his controversial marriage to a girl young enough to be his daughter. Pointing to a portrait of the empire's genius painter Berenica, Johannes explains that the Pope's young bride was originally betrothed to the brilliant artist before being stolen away by divine authority. The Emperor reads the shocking files in absolute disbelief as Johannes explains that the devastated artist is already sowing the seeds of a massive, explosive rebellion. Johannes details how the genius painter's secret, provocative artworks will expose the horrific crimes of the clergy, spreading a poison of deep, irreversible distrust throughout the entire empire. Transitioning to the next phase, Johannes's carriage rolls through the paved streets of the capital, the heavy weight of their treasonous path hanging heavily in the air. Inside the carriage, Johannes clutches his head in deep exhaustion, knowing that their dangerous play has officially begun and there is absolutely no turning back. Glancing out the window to distract his racing mind, the powerful Duke suddenly freezes, his sharp eyes widening in complete, utter shock. Amidst the bustling, crowded market streets of the Commoner district, a familiar, unmistakable figure catches his attention. His heart stops as he stares at the back of a modestly dressed woman, her distinct elegance piercing through the crowd and making him whisper her name in sheer disbelief. Meanwhile, nearby in the bustling district, a desperate mother tearfully begs a church official to take custody of her young boy, leaving him in the care of the Holy Temple. On the other side of the vibrant street, a hardworking woman bids a cheerful farewell to her family, determined to earn a fortune to secure her child's future. The gentle chime of a bakery door's bell rings out, signaling a sudden, fateful encounter that is about to collide with the grand, dangerous game of empires. Stepping into her warm, fragrant bakery, Margaret is caught completely off guard as her coworker reveals that a mysterious visitor has been waiting specifically for her. The heavy tension in the room thickens as an elegantly dressed noblewoman turns around, addressing Margaret with a calm, piercing familiarity. Margaret's breath catches in her throat as she recognizes the unmistakable, breathtaking face of Lady Rebecca Devonshire, the daughter of her family's sworn enemy. Seated together in the quiet corner of the bakery, Rebecca attempts to break the icy silence, praising the charming simplicity of Margaret's sanctuary. But Margaret refuses to let her guard down, coldly demanding to know why a high-ranking noble has dared to enter her humble workspace without warning. Rebecca quickly apologizes, confessing that a secret, desperate escape from her suffocating mansion was the only way she could reach her. In her mind, Rebecca remembers her first life, recalling how Margaret's cold, bitter hatred had once driven an unbreakable wedge between them. It was all because of the sacred statue of goddess Dephria, a divine family heirloom that held a devastating legacy of greed. The ruthless Zeppelin, desperate to possess the relic, had ordered the merciless burning of Margaret's ancestral home when her father refused to yield. Only Margaret and her unborn child survived that horrific, blazing inferno, leaving her with a soul-deep hatred for anyone bearing the Devonshire name. Rebecca directly addresses this bleeding wound, showing that she fully understands the righteous fury and resentment Margaret harbors. Reaching across the wooden table, Rebecca gently grasps Margaret's trembling hand, pleading to be judged as an individual, not by her corrupt family name. With unwavering focus, Rebecca delivers a life-altering proposal, offering Margaret the position of master pastry chef in her secret, rising business empire. Margaret is struck dumb by the sudden offer, deeply suspicious of why a wealthy noblewoman would seek out a disgraced commoner baker. Rebecca hesitates, knowing she can never reveal the terrifying truth of her regression. She vividly remembers her past life, where Margaret was the sole, saintly soul who showed her kindness when the rest of the world turned its back. Margaret had fed her and protected her during her agonizing postpartum recovery, a debt of pure grace Rebecca is now fiercely determined to repay. To prove her absolute sincerity, Rebecca makes a stunning pledge, promising an equal 50-50 split of all future profits. Adjusting her bonnet with a confident, dazzling smile, Rebecca leaves the stunned baker with the promise that she will never regret joining her. Stepping back out onto the bustling cobblestone streets, Rebecca walks briskly, hoping her desperate gamble will successfully win Margaret's loyalty. She smiles warmly, clutching a parting gift of fresh bread given to her by Margaret's kind-hearted coworker. Knowing she cannot risk bringing commoner street food back into her strictly guarded mansion, Rebecca decides to devour the treat right then and there. Taking a joyful, delicious bite, she loses herself in the simple pleasure of the busy market streets. Suddenly, a strong, heavy hand clamps down onto her shoulder, arresting her mid-step and sending a jolt of sheer terror straight down her spine. Rebecca's heart stops as she spins around in a panic, bracing herself for the worst. Her fear turns to absolute bewilderment as she locks eyes with the intense, searching gaze of Julian. Gasping for air, Rebecca angrily demands to know what he is doing stalking her through the commoner district. Julian rubs the back of his neck, his tough exterior softening as he offers a rare, awkward apology for frightening her. Sensing the curious whispers of the gathering crowd, Julian firmly ushers her toward his private, unmarked carriage. Settling into the plush leather seats, Julian crosses his arms and scowls, clearly annoyed with himself for following her like a lovesick fool. Sitting opposite him, Rebecca secretly feels a sudden, powerful urge to share her hidden victories and business plans with him. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the carriage window interrupts their tense silence as a servant announces they have brought his special order. Rebecca's eyes widen in absolute disbelief as the door swings open to reveal an incredible sight. A lavish feast of hot, freshly cooked street market food is laid out before them, filling the carriage with a mouth-watering aroma. Rebecca's mouth waters as she stares at the nostalgic dishes she hasn't tasted since her tragic childhood. Julian casually explains that he bought the spread out of pure curiosity, smugly inviting her to eat her fill. Rebecca proudly tries to refuse, insisting she must return immediately, but a loud, betraying rumble from her stomach echoes through the carriage. Her cheeks burn with a furious, overwhelming blush as Julian's smirk widens. Chuckling at her stubbornness, Julian extends a perfectly grilled skewer, teasing her that her body clearly disagrees with her pride. Defeated and starving, Rebecca hesitantly reaches out to accept the offering. The explosive, savory flavor of the street food hits her tongue, momentarily taking her breath away with pure, nostalgic bliss. Julian leans back, teasingly asking if her noble household is actively starving her for her to look so incredibly desperate. A genuine, melodic laugh escapes Rebecca's lips as she lightheartedly scolds him for his incredibly blunt manners. Julian freezes, his breath catching as he is completely captivated by the rare, radiant beauty of her unfiltered joy. Resting his chin on his hand, his eyes soften with deep, unspoken affection, whispering that a genuine smile suits her infinitely better. As the carriage rolls up to the looming castle walls, the fleeting moment of warmth dissolves back into the cold reality of their dangerous schemes. Rebecca slips through the palace corridors, desperately checking that her commoner disguise is still perfectly intact. Suddenly, the rapid echoes of approaching footsteps bounce off the stone walls, causing her to whirl around in panic. Heart pounding, she desperately attempts to flee, knowing that being caught in this disguise means total ruin. But a sudden, oppressive wave of energy locks her limbs in place, a dark, sickening aura that can only belong to the terrifying magic of Zeppelin. Storming back into the mansion, Zeppelin's suffocating presence sends a shiver of terror through the staff as he coldly demands to know his sister's whereabouts. Dismissing the butler's attempt to stall him with a sharp wave of his hand, the tyrant decides to check on her himself, oblivious to the dangerous secret she is hiding. As he climbs the steps, his mind is consumed by the Emperor's sudden, reckless provocation of the Holy Temple, suspecting a deeper, far more insidious conspiracy. Every step he takes is heavy with growing paranoia, desperately trying to pierce through the political fog and locate the unseen enemy pulling the strings. But his thoughts grind to a halt as he reaches the corridor, instantly sensing that someone has breached Rebecca's chamber without his permission. Before his suspicion can boil over, the doors burst open and Rebecca throws herself into his arms, desperately trying to intercept him. Zeppelin freezes in absolute shock, staring down at her with wide eyes as he realizes the sister who was supposedly paralyzed is standing on her own feet. Forcing a bright, deceptive smile, Rebecca explains that she had been secretly practicing her steps just to surprise him. Wrapping his arms around her, Zeppelin breathes a sigh of relief, completely unaware of the cold, calculating dread washing over her as she holds him. Inside the quiet chamber, her loyal maid Kana stands frozen in suspense, praying their desperate gamble isn't exposed. Looking up at him with mock sweetness, Rebecca gently questions why his long trip was cut so incredibly short. Zeppelin's expression suddenly turns sharp, a dangerous, mocking smirk playing on his lips as he questions if she is unhappy with his sudden return. Heart-pounding, Rebecca forces herself to smile through the rising panic, claiming she was merely overwhelmed with joy to see him. Laughing off his suspicion as a joke, Zeppelin warns her that he will indeed be leaving the mansion tomorrow morning, but his gaze suddenly darkens with an intense, possessive hunger. Leaning in close, he whispers a chilling command for her to wait for him tonight, promising to never let her escape his sight again. Rebecca's breath catches in her throat as his face brushes against her neck, the suffocating proximity of her tormentor driving her to the absolute brink of panic. Suddenly, an explosive, violent sneeze echoes through the room, shattering the dark, intimate tension in an instant. Zeppelin recoils in utter bewilderment, his possessive trance completely broken by the bizarre, unladylike noise. Flustered and coughing, he quickly retreats out the door, ordering her to stay put until his return. The moment the door slams shut, Rebecca collapses to her knees, gasping for air as Kana rushes to her side in a frenzy. Trembling, Rebecca looks up and weakly apologizes to her maid for the heart-stopping close call they just survived. Kana nods in relief, but looks toward the corner of the room with deep, lingering anxiety, knowing their secret is still hiding in plain sight. Approaching the massive wardrobe, Kana hesitatingly pulls the heavy wooden door open. Huddled inside is Susan, Rebecca's secret body double, who looks up sheepishly after her disastrous, poorly timed sneeze. Susan smiles awkwardly, assuring them she is fine despite almost ruining the entire operation. Rebecca sighs with immense gratitude, knowing Susan was the only reason she was able to sneak out into the commoner district unnoticed. During the day, Susan had perfectly played the role of the frail, painting-focused noblewoman, completely fooling the guards. To reward her immense bravery, Rebecca happily promises to give Susan the precious, expensive necklace she wore as a decoy. Looking out the window into the night, Rebecca realizes that despite the terrifying close call, her plan succeeded perfectly. She recalls her secret ride with Julian, remembering how his unexpected warmth had offered her a brief, beautiful sanctuary. A soft, genuine smile spreads across her face as she remembers the simple, nostalgic meal they shared together. But her face suddenly drains of all color as a terrifying, sudden realization strikes her like a lightning bolt. Meanwhile, in his dimly lit study, Zeppelin sits in brooding silence, his mind refusing to let go of the bizarre encounter. Staring at his hands, his eyes turn icy cold as he remembers the faint, unmistakable scent of sweat on Rebecca's skin. A sickening realization dawns on him. She is actively hiding something, acting as if she is preparing to flee his grasp. Determined to uncover the truth, he reaches for the bell cord, summoning his most ruthless confidants to initiate a hunt. The head maid enters the room in silence, waiting as Zeppelin cryptically mentions a dark, forbidden tool he created long ago. A wicked, sinister grin spreads across his face as he declares that the time has finally come to unleash it once more. His mind races back to the embrace, parsing the impossible scent of physical exhaustion on a woman who is supposed to be bedridden. He recalls her cold, shifting expressions and how she constantly avoided his gaze, confirming her compliance was nothing but a lie. Even though his loyal watchdogs reported nothing out of the ordinary, he knows his instincts are never wrong. Suddenly, his eyes flare with a terrifying, brilliant clarity as the missing puzzle piece falls into place. He remembers exactly when her behavior shifted. It was the victory banquet, the very night she woke up to her new reality. Eager to put his dark plan into motion, Zeppelin strides down the quiet, shadowed corridors of the estate. But he abruptly halts his steps as a familiar figure blocks his path in the dim light. Under the soft glow of the magic lamp stands Alicia, her presence exuding a quiet, undeniable strength. Caressing her swollen belly with a gentle smile, she softly tells him that their unborn child can already feel its father's return. Stepping closer, she asks if he will speak to I'm just a language model and can't help with that. Zeppelin stares down at her face, completely mesmerized by the sudden, radiant warmth emanating from her. His heart skips a beat in sudden, overwhelming fascination, wondering if Alicia had always possessed such breathtaking, dangerous beauty. Long ago, before the darkness fully consumed him, Zeppelin's carriage rattled through a quiet, remote village on the frontier in search of a painter. Stepping out into the crisp rural air, his sharp eyes scanned the rustic surroundings, completely unaware of the fateful meeting awaiting him. His presence immediately commanded the quiet space, his cold gaze searching for anything of interest in this forgotten corner of the empire. Suddenly, a young maid gasped in shock, dropping her wooden water bucket as her purple eyes locked onto the intimidating nobleman. In that fleeting moment of youthful curiosity, a passionate, secret affair was born, drawing them together in a cocoon of temporary warmth. Yet, even in the quiet intimacy of their shared nights, Zeppelin made no promises for their future, fully intending to leave her behind once his task was complete. But the past refused to stay buried, and weeks later, his sister Rebecca formally introduced a new face to their noble household. Zeppelin froze in sheer disbelief as the familiar, tenacious woman smiled warmly at him, having successfully infiltrated his very home. Cloaked in the uniform of a simple maid, Alicia approached him in the quiet corridor, boldly asking if he still found her beautiful. Captivated by her sheer audacity, Zeppelin leaned in close, confirming his lingering attraction as he cupped her face in his hands. What began as fleeting curiosity soon spiraled out of control. When Alicia announced her pregnancy, a surge of possessive jealousy rocked his core, feeling as though she had stolen the legacy meant for Rebecca. Yet, looking at her now, a strange, unprecedented warmth bloomed in his chest, making him realize he might actually learn to love the child she carried. A profound, unsettling realization washed over him as he stared into the dim light of the corridor, his thoughts swirling with dark fascination. Standing before Alicia, he knew she could never truly replace Rebecca, yet her magnetic presence was becoming impossible to ignore. Reaching out, his gloved hand rested gently on her shoulder, a silent vow of protection and possession sealing her fate. With quiet authority, he guided her toward her chambers, determined to lock her away where no one else could ever touch her. Meanwhile, in another wing of the vast estate, a loyal maid quietly slipped into Rebecca's dimly lit bedroom to deliver urgent news. Rebecca turned around with a cold, knowing look as the maid confirmed that Zeppelin had taken the bait and entered Alicia's chambers. Gently twirling a strand of her golden hair, Rebecca felt a wave of icy satisfaction wash over her as her intricate trap began to close. She vividly recalled the secret deal she had struck with Alicia, urging the ambitious woman to use her pregnancy to capture Zeppelin's heart. Alicia had been utterly bewildered by the offer, unable to comprehend why Rebecca would willingly hand over the tyrant's affection. But Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing. With Zeppelin leaving for a month on the Emperor's command, the stage was perfectly set. As the cold night wind swept over the silent castle walls, Rebecca smiled, knowing that the tyrant's world would crumble before he returned. The following morning, the grand carriage prepared for departure in the courtyard, marking the start of Zeppelin's long, temporary exile. Before boarding, his headmaid reported that Alicia had spent the entire night weeping for his return, fueling his deep, possessive vanity. A dark, mocking smirk crossed Zeppelin's face as he announced he had a parting gift for his beloved wives before his departure. Both Rebecca and Alicia watched in mounting dread, instantly sensing the sinister undercurrent in his seemingly generous gesture. With a sickening, heavy metallic clang, iron shackles suddenly locked tightly around their delicate wrists. Alicia gasped in pure terror, her voice trembling as she stared down at the cold, binding metal holding her captive. Zeppelin coldly explained that the head maid held the only key, strictly forbidden from releasing them unless a dire emergency arose. Leaning in with a chilling smile, he commanded them to wait for him patiently, leaving his terrified wives chained together in his wake. Once the tyrant's carriage finally departed, a cloaked investigator knelt before Rebecca in her private study, reporting his findings. Rebecca looked down at him, her eyes burning with desperate intensity as she demanded to know if he had found the evidence she needed. The investigator grimaced, admitting he had failed to secure the concrete proof of Zeppelin's crimes, but his next words offered a sliver of hope. He revealed that while the proof was elusive, he had discovered a potential source who held the answers to everything. He spoke of a survivor who had miraculously escaped a legendary, heavily fortified island fortress surrounded by deadly, raging seas. This was the secret, inescapable prison where Zeppelin kept his most valuable hostages hidden away from the rest of the world. The investigator explained that a rumor was spreading about a madman who claimed to have broken out of that island, though tracking him down would be incredibly difficult. Clasping her shackled hands tightly, Rebecca looked at her loyal agent, Robert, and called his name with absolute resolve. Robert answered instantly, but his breath caught in his throat as Rebecca suddenly asked him a highly dangerous, unexpected question. Leaning forward with a brilliant, calculating smile, she commanded him to spread a devastating rumor among Zeppelin's own hunting dogs. She whispered her master stroke. He was to convince the world that Rebecca was actually a divine saint, blessed with miraculous powers. Robert stared at her in utter shock as she detailed the lie that she could see the future and that her forced marriage was merely a holy trial. Far away, in a secluded hideout, an explosive shout of triumph shattered the quiet afternoon air as a breakthrough was finally made. An eccentric alchemist shook with manic laughter, his eyes wide with wild, unhinged glee as he looked at his experimental table. Holding a rare glowing sprout, he realized he had finally succeeded in cultivating the forbidden plant that would guarantee his freedom from the Duke. His mind raced back to a month ago when he was first brought to this incredibly lavish, state-of-the-art laboratory. At the time, the alchemist had been deeply skeptical, asking why a powerful noble would grant him such an expensive facility completely free of charge. The enigmatic Duke had merely smiled warmly, telling him to put aside his worries and focus entirely on his research. Pampered with endless luxury, exquisite meals, and unlimited materials, the alchemist believed he had found heaven, completely blind to the dark trap tightening around him. Remembering his initial relief, the alchemist recalls how he once foolishly believed the rumors of the Duke's cruel personality were nothing but exaggerated lies. But reality shattered his delusions in an instant when the lab door flew open and the tyrant's voice boomed through the room, demanding to know how he dared to rest. Shaken to his core, the alchemist was violently hauled up by his collar, cornered by a cold glare as the Duke whispered a brutal, non-negotiable timeline of 2 months. Zeppelin's eyes burned with ruthless impatience as he demanded the immediate cultivation of the forbidden devil's claw, leaving the alchemist trembling in sheer mounting panic. The weeks that followed became a living nightmare, plagued by Zeppelin's endless mocking taunts that denied him even the basic right to eat or sleep. He realized too late that the terrifying rumors about the Duke were actually a massive understatement, locking him into a contract he desperately wished he could escape. Yet, driven by the pure instinct to survive, the eccentric genius defied all odds, proudly presenting the fully grown, mysterious plant in just half the allotted time. Right on cue, the heavy doors burst open once more as Zeppelin stepped inside, his sharp voice immediately demanding to know if the weapon was ready. Swallowing his fear, the alchemist stepped forward, offering the carefully cultivated pot for the tyrant's personal inspection. Zeppelin's eyes locked onto the dark leaves, asking coldly how the potent poison was meant to be administered. Satisfied with the answer, the Duke tossed a remarkably heavy pouch of gold onto the table, a sudden reward for the unexpected speed of the breakthrough. The alchemist stared at the glittering fortune in disbelief, his greed momentarily overshadowing the lingering terror in his chest. To his utter astonishment, Zeppelin offered a quiet, surprisingly gentle apology, admitting his harsh demands were merely born of dire urgency. Touched by this unexpected display of warmth, the alchemist began to lower his guard, only to freeze when Zeppelin casually declared it was already time to begin the next task. The momentary relief vanished as Zeppelin brought up a legendary, closely guarded imperial crop, the rare rose grape. With a sickening, dark smile, the Duke delivered a horrifying new command to engineer a lethal, unstoppable blight to ruin the Count of Devonshire's patented harvest in a single week. A cold sweat broke over the alchemist as the true, bottomless cruelty of the Duke registered in his mind once again. This man was not human, but a devil in disguise. Meanwhile, under the bright morning sun, the grand estate seemed tranquil. Yet a silent, devastating storm was brewing just beneath its elegant surface. In the quiet palace gardens, Zeppelin's elite watchdogs gathered to share their regular reports, completely unaware of the trap closing around them. Robert stepped forward, his expression deadpan, but his words delivering a shocking revelation that instantly caught his partner off guard. He began to detail a bizarre, unexplained event from a few days ago, recalling how a sudden accident befell him precisely when the madam predicted it would. The simple-minded guards, the image of Rebecca as a pure, divine saintess began to take root, perfectly matching her breathtaking beauty and gentle soul. Though one watchdog tried to dismiss it as a mere coincidence, another quickly spoke up, claiming he had experienced the exact same supernatural foresight. Rodrigo stepped forward with a tense, serious gaze, ready to recount the terrifying moment that shattered his own skepticism. He vividly recalled a quiet afternoon in the corridor when Rebecca had suddenly stopped in her tracks, delivering a cryptic, urgent warning to watch the sky. Without offering any further explanation, she had simply turned away, leaving him utterly bewildered by her sudden gravity. As she walked away, her sorrowful, whispered lament about divine trials and suffering seemed to echo with a heavy, sacred weight. Seconds later, a massive, heavy object shattered violently right where he had been standing, leaving him gasping in absolute paralyzed shock. The memory cemented his belief. The guards whispered among themselves, convinced that Rebecca's divine powers were a hidden truth, active only when her tyrannical husband was away. Later that evening, Rodrigo silently entered Rebecca's dimly lit chambers, his heart pounding as he stood before the woman he now believed to be a holy saintess. Rebecca looked up at him, a soft, hypnotic smile playing on her lips as she prepared to spring her ultimate trap. With quiet, captivating authority, she asked him if he was finally ready to abandon the tyrant and pledge his absolute loyalty to her. Far from the estate, nestled in a lush, secluded valley, stood a grand mansion where a different kind of captivity was playing out. Inside a sunlit studio, a mysterious painter worked meticulously on his canvas, his brushstrokes filled with an intense, quiet focus. Standing nearby, the young Count of Devonshire watched him in silent irritation, questioning the true purpose of his stay. Sent here under the guise of monitoring the artist, the Count couldn't shake the creeping, uneasy feeling that something was deeply wrong. Glancing out at the heavy, unwavering guard posted just beyond the doors, a frustrating realization began to take hold. He was no protector, he was a prisoner himself, trapped in a luxurious, inescapable exile while the world moved on without him. Retreating to his bed, he clutched a delicate pocket watch, staring longingly at the beautiful portrait of Rebecca secured inside. Driven by a sudden, restless energy, he stood up, determined to find some distraction from the suffocating boredom of his confinement. He approached the canvas, immediately recognizing the soft, familiar outline of the woman taking shape under the painter's hand. The painter paused, turning back with a knowing, highly suggestive grin that made the Count's chest tighten with sudden defensiveness. Flustered, the Count quickly claimed he had never intended for his private, rough sketch to be seen by anyone else. But the artist merely hummed in amusement, stepping closer to praise the raw, undeniable talent hidden behind the Count's noble posture. When the Count dismissed his own work as garbage, the painter softly objected, pointing out the deep, unmistakable affection poured into every single stroke. The comment struck a dangerous chord, prompting the Count to demand how the stranger could possibly know the identity of his muse. With an easy shrug, the artist remarked that no true painter in the empire could ever fail to recognize the legendary Countess of Devonshire. Step by step, the painter closed the distance between them, boldly reaching out to cup the Count's chin in a sudden, intimate gesture. He whispered a chillingly observant remark, noting the breathtaking, identical beauty shared between the Count and his mysterious counterpart. Tracing the delicate lines of his face, the painter stared into the Count's clear sea-blue eyes, setting off a wave of intense, suffocating tension that threatened to undo them both. Swatting the intrusive hands away, the proud blonde noble snaps in outrage, refusing to be treated like a mere prop or a plaything for the artist's amusement. The painter quickly backs off with a placating gesture, reminding the noble of the endless, agonizing boredom they have both endured in this remote exile. A chilling curiosity gleams in the artist's eyes as he boldly begs the noble to become his muse, promising a legacy that will transcend generations. Recoiling in disgust, the noble demands to know if he is being asked to degrade his noble standing for some scandalous, blasphemous portrait. The artist merely chuckles, crossing his arms as he casually points out that his style is far too abstract for anyone to ever recognize the noble's face. With a low, manipulative purr, the eccentric painter presses his advantage, waiting to see if the noble's desperation will override his pride. The noble hesitates, his breath catching as the sheer weight of being immortalized by the empire's greatest genius begins to tempt him. Glancing at the masterpiece in progress, he feels a sudden surge of awe, realizing that this artwork is destined to be discussed for centuries. A dangerous rationale takes root in his mind. If the painting remains strictly anonymous, he can simply deny any rumors of his involvement. Clearing his throat to hide his embarrassment, the noble reluctantly yields, agreeing to pose for just a fleeting moment. A victorious, smug grin spreads across the painter's face, fully aware that he has successfully ensnared his target in yet another elaborate game. Meanwhile, far away in the capital, the sun shines brightly over the grand imperial palace, completely masking the dark plots unraveling inside. Inside his lavish office, Duke Julian flings a useless report onto his desk, a sneer of absolute disgust playing on his lips as he mutters about the young noble's utter foolishness. His pen flies across the parchment as he lays out a brutal scheme, determined to lock his rival away and make him suffer a fraction of the agony Rebecca endured. Folding the letter with chilling precision, Julian hands it over to his loyal agent, Croa, commanding him to deliver the instructions straight to the painter. With a cold, merciless glare, the Duke orders that the guard around his prisoner be doubled, making even the simple act of breathing a struggle. A deep, crimson stream of wine is poured into a crystal glass, mirroring the bloodthirsty ambitions taking form in the shadows. Julian paces slowly across the grand study, clutching the glass tightly as the overwhelming weight of his secrets threatens to crush him. Swirling the dark liquid, his thoughts drift back to the capital, his heart aching with a sudden, painful longing for his beloved. In his mind, Rebecca's radiant, angelic smile appears like a cruel illusion, driving him to the absolute brink of madness. Suddenly, a violent spasm of agony rips through his chest, causing him to choke in suffocating pain. Gasping for air, Julian stumbles toward his desk, frantically clawing at the drawers to find his emergency medicine. He pours a handful of white pills into his trembling hand, his vision blurring as the darkness threatens to consume him. With a desperate gulp, he downs the pills, fighting tooth and nail against the invisible entity clawing at his life. Collapsing heavily into his chair, he pants in exhaustion, terrified that the curse's suffocating grip is growing stronger with every passing day. Wiping the cold sweat from his brow, he realizes with absolute panic that he must rescue Rebecca from the Count's clutches before it is too late. Suddenly, his eyes lock onto a bottle of wine resting on the desk, a brilliant, terrifying idea sparking in his mind. He grabs the bottle of Devonshire wine, realizing that the family's legendary trade is the perfect weapon to orchestrate their absolute destruction. A dark, wicked smirk plays on Julian's face as he whispers a lethal vow. His rival will never have the chance to lay eyes on Rebecca again. Meanwhile, the quiet courtyards of the Devonshire estate remain peaceful, entirely unaware of the silent insurrection brewing within. Walking down the grand hallways, Rebecca mentally counts her victories, having successfully turned 6 of the estate's formidable guards to her side. She knows the stakes are incredibly high, with 13 lethal guard dogs watching her every move, waiting for a single misstep. Her network of spies has grown, with the headmaid Grace and the butler Octavio already secured, leaving only the unyielding knight Bates to deal with. Her manipulation was flawless. She easily bought the loyalty of the 6 guards by offering them the one thing they desperately craved, the freedom of their captured loved ones. Yet the path forward is blocked by the remaining 4 guards, presenting a dangerous hurdle she has yet to overcome. 3 of them are heavily trapped in a web of endless debt, but the final guard's weakness remains an absolute, impenetrable mystery. Rebecca bites her lip in frustration, desperately searching for a way to break the remaining defenses before her time runs out. Her deep thoughts are instantly shattered by a piercing, frantic scream echoing from the stairs, demanding release. Looking up, she witnesses a fierce confrontation between the headmaid Grace and the Count's pregnant mistress, who is bound in heavy, silver handcuffs. Grace remains entirely cold and unbothered, flatly stating that she is only enforcing the Count's direct commands. The frantic mistress screams in desperation, warning that she is carrying the Count's precious heir and that any stress could end in tragedy. Turning her back with icy indifference, the headmaid walks away, telling her to follow the household rules if she wants to survive. Grace leans in close, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper as she warns the mistress that she holds the power to inflict unimaginable punishment. With a cruel, mocking smile, Grace concedes that she will spare her only for the sake of the unborn child, leaving the girl trembling in fear. Screaming a desperate threat of revenge, the mistress storms off, her pride thoroughly shattered. Just as Grace turns to go, she suddenly stops on the steps, her gaze locking onto a silent observer. Rebecca stands at the base of the stairs, her expression cool and calculating as she watches the dramatic display of cruelty. A heavy, suffocating silence fills the air as the headmaid slowly walks down the steps toward the madam. Passing close by, Grace delivers a cryptic, chilling warning, reminding Rebecca of the countless times she has turned a blind eye to her secret actions. Rebecca stands frozen as the maid departs, her blood running cold as she realizes that her most trusted ally might actually be her most dangerous threat. The headmaid's sharp accusation immediately cuts through the silence, dredging up the daring stunt when the mistress tried to slip past security in a common maid's disguise. Standing with absolute, chilling authority, Grace reminds her that nothing within the massive walls of this estate ever escapes her calculating gaze. Defiant despite the mounting pressure, Rebecca attempts to deflect the threat with a sharp, sarcastic bite, masking her internal panic. But Grace's stern armor cracks slightly as she recalls a painful debt from the past, the tragic time her own daughter lay dying. and Rebecca's mercy allowed her a final, precious goodbye. Driven by an unyielding sense of honor, the headmaid declares she will repay that profound kindness by granting the mistress 3 unspoken favors. As her first act of silent solidarity, Grace promises she will bury the treasonous rumors of the saintess and keep them from reaching the Count's ears. Sweeping away with a quiet rustle, the enigmatic servant leaves behind a chillingly provocative whisper, promising that this massive cover-up won't even count toward their secret deal. Left shivering in the cold corridor, Rebecca stares after her, a terrifying realization washing over her as she remembers where she has seen that exact calculating look before. The headmaid's words echo in Rebecca's mind. Grace carries herself with the undeniable confidence of a true master, brushing it off as mere ancestral devotion to the estate. Clinging to her heavy chains, Rebecca forces a tense, grateful nod, fully aware that she is dealing with a woman who holds the ultimate key to her survival. Ascending the grand staircase, the mistress calls out to confirm her remaining leverage, desperately needing to know exactly how much power she still wields. From the shadows below, the headmaid delivers a final, low warning, commanding her mistress to never forget the fragile nature of their secret pact. But the heavy silence is suddenly shattered by a violent, chaotic uproar of slamming doors and furious voices echoing from the private quarters. Rebecca rushes toward the noise, freezing in utter disbelief as she finds Kana pinning none other than Duke Julian to the floor with a deadly dagger. Lethal instincts taking over, the fierce guardian maid refuses to yield, keeping the elite noble completely at her mercy in a display of raw, dangerous force. Dusting off his fine green coat, a thoroughly irritated Julian grumbles about whether Kana is supposed to be a loyal servant or a trained assassin. Sparks of pure hostility fly across the room as Kana demands to know the exact identity of the suspicious intruder she just subdued. Rubbing her temple in absolute exhaustion, Rebecca realizes she must act fast to prevent her secret network from tearing itself apart. She formally introduces her 2 secret weapons, Kana, the deadly knight posing as a housemaid, and Julian, the powerful Duke Johannes operating in the deepest shadows. Desperate to diffuse the explosive tension, Rebecca tries to force their hands together to establish a civil, polite alliance. But the forced peace instantly collapses as both parties violently recoil in mutual, stubborn disgust. Cutting through the childish bickering, Julian's gaze turns deadly serious as he insists on discussing a matter of extreme, classified urgency. Before he can even take a step, Kana defiantly blocks his path, refusing to let the suspicious noble near her mistress without protection. Rebecca gently intercedes, placing a reassuring hand on her loyal guard to signal that the Duke poses no immediate threat to their plans. Reluctantly stepping back, Kana yields to the command, but vows to strike the Duke down the very second things go sideways. Finally alone, Rebecca collapses onto her bed in sheer exhaustion, pleading with Julian to stop making these heart-stopping, unannounced break-ins. Sitting beside her, Julian's playful facade drops, replaced by the grim weight of the illegal conspiracy they're weaving. With a triumphant, predatory smirk, Julian drops a massive bombshell. He has successfully smuggled the highly forbidden Devil's Claw into the estate. A surge of desperate hope rushes